The fire is lit, the furs are warm, and the night is long. Let us begin. But first, let yourself become fully present in this moment of transition. Feel the weight of your body against the softness beneath you, much as a Viking might have settled into their bed of sheepskins and woolen blankets after a day of labor, their muscles aching pleasantly from the honest work of survival. The modern world, with its urgent notifications and endless demands, fades away like morning mist over a fjord. Picture, if you will, the vast expanse of medieval Scandinavia, a land where summer brought barely 4 hours of darkness and winter stretched the night across 18 hours of star-filled sky. In this realm of extremes, where survival depended on community and the bonds between people were as essential as the bonds between planks in a longship's hull, intimacy took on layers of meaning that our modern minds can barely comprehend. The Vikings we'll encounter tonight were not the savage barbarians of popular imagination, though they could indeed be fearsome in battle. They were farmers and traders, poets and craftspeople, explorers who reached the shores of North America centuries before Columbus, and lawmakers who established some of Europe's earliest democratic assemblies. They were people who understood that in a harsh world, the warmth shared between bodies, the laughter echoing through a longhouse, and the quiet moments stolen between husband and wife were as precious as silver or gold. In their world, sexuality was never divorced from the practical realities of life. A successful marriage meant strong children who could work the land and defend the homestead. It meant alliances between families that could weather the storms of famine, war, and the long, dark winters. Yet within these practical arrangements, passion bloomed like wildflowers in the brief Nordic summer, sudden, intense, and achingly beautiful. Tonight, we'll discover that Vikings approached physical love with the same directness they brought to everything else in their lives. They had words for concepts that other medieval cultures barely whispered about. Their poetry celebrated not just heroic deeds, but also the curve of a beloved's neck, the warmth of shared furs, the way firelight played across skin in the intimate darkness of a sleeping alcove. The goddess Freya, whom they revered above almost all others, presided over both war and love, fertility and death. In the Viking mind, these forces were not opposites but partners in the eternal dance of existence. To love passionately was to live fully, and to live fully was to honor the gods who had granted them this brief, brilliant existence in a world of ice and fire. As we journey together through these 4 portraits of Viking intimacy, you'll find that the details emerge slowly, like objects materializing from fog. The rhythm of their lives, so different from ours yet recognizably human, will wrap around you like the steady sound of waves against a ship's hull. The stories we'll share, some gleaned from archaeological discoveries, others whispered down through the sagas, will unfold with the gentle persistence of seasons changing, of tides rising and falling. Let your breathing slow to match the pace of our exploration. There is no hurry here, no urgency. Like the Vikings themselves, who understood that the best things in life, love, loyalty, the perfect curve of a ship's prow, could not be rushed, we will take our time. We will savor each detail, each glimpse into their world, allowing the images to build slowly in your mind like layers of snow accumulating on a winter landscape. The longhouses are waiting, their doors open to welcome us in from the cold. The mead horns are filled, the fires are banked with enough fuel to last through the longest night, and the storytellers have gathered their tales. Ancient voices call to us across the centuries, inviting us to understand how they loved, how they lived, and how their hearts beat with the same hopes and desires that still move us today. Rest now, and let us walk together into that distant world, where the line between myth and reality was as thin as morning frost, and where every sunset brought the promise of intimate warmth in the heart of the endless Nordic night. The sun hangs low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that seem to stretch endlessly across the Nordic landscape. In a Viking settlement nestled between rolling hills and the distant glimmer of a fjord, the day's work is drawing to a close. The sound of axes biting into wood fades, replaced by the gentle lowing of cattle being brought in for the night and the soft murmur of voices as families gather for the evening meal. Let yourself drift into this twilight world, where the boundary between day and night blurred into something altogether more magical. The Longhouse before us stretches nearly 100 feet in length, its timber walls weathered silver gray by countless seasons of snow and rain. Smoke rises lazily from the opening in the reed-thatched roof, carrying with it the mingled scents of roasting meat, baking bread, and the sweet, honey-thick aroma of fermenting mead. As you approach the great wooden doors, carved with intricate knotwork patterns that seem to writhe and dance in the flickering light, you can hear the low hum of conversation within. This is the heart of Viking social life, not just a dwelling, but a world unto itself where multiple generations of a family, their servants, guests, and occasionally strangers seeking shelter, all shared the same vast space under one soaring roof. Step across the threshold and feel your eyes adjust to the warm, golden glow within. The central hearth runs down the middle of the hall like a river of flame, its fires reflected in the polished shields hanging from the walls and glinting off the arm rings worn by the men and women gathered around the blazing logs. The air is thick with wood smoke and the rich scents of the evening meal, perhaps lamb stewed with wild herbs, fresh bread still warm from the clay ovens, and wheels of aged cheese brought up from the cool storage chambers beneath the floor. The very architecture of this space speaks to the Viking understanding of human nature and social needs. Notice how the massive oak posts that support the roof are not merely functional. They create natural alcoves and semi-private spaces within the greater hall. Between these posts, heavy woolen tapestries can be hung to provide additional privacy, their surfaces decorated with scenes from mythology and daily life. The posts themselves are carved with protective runes and intricate knotwork, each one a masterpiece of craftsmanship that speaks to the importance placed on making even the most practical elements beautiful. But it is not just the food that creates the intoxicating atmosphere of this Viking evening. Already, clay vessels and carved wooden bowls filled with mead are making their rounds among the assembled company. The mead itself is a marvel, fermented from honey gathered from wild beehives hidden deep in the forest, flavored with herbs and spices traded from distant lands. Some batches are infused with meadowsweet for its gentle, almond-like fragrance, others with bog myrtle for its slightly intoxicating properties, or with juniper berries that add a crisp, pine-like bite to the golden liquid. The process of creating this mead is itself a ritual of community and patience. The honey, gathered during the brief summer months when the bees work frantically to store enough sweetness to survive the long winter, is mixed with spring water drawn from the clearest streams. The fermentation takes place in great oak barrels, carefully tended by women who understand the delicate balance of temperature and time required to produce the perfect drink. Some batches are aged for months or even years, developing complex flavors that can transport the drinker to memories of summer meadows even in the depths of winter. Watch as the mead horn passes from hand to hand, each person taking a measured sip before passing it along with a murmured blessing or jest. The horns themselves are works of art, carved from the horns of aurochs or decorated with bands of silver and bronze, their surfaces polished smooth by countless hands and lips. Notice how the warriors' voices grow louder and more boastful with each round, but observe too the subtle changes in the women's behavior. How a shy smile lingers a moment longer than propriety might usually allow, how fingers brush against fingers as the drinking vessel changes hands, how eyes meet across the flickering firelight with promises that words cannot express in such public company. The serving of mead follows its own careful protocol, reflective of the complex social hierarchies that govern Viking society. The household's most honored guests receive their portions first, served in the finest vessels and accompanied by the choicest morsels of food. The lady of the house herself often takes on the role of cupbearer, a position of great honor that allows her to demonstrate both her hospitality and her status. As she moves through the hall, her long woolen dress rustling softly against the rushes scattered on the floor, she becomes the center of a subtle dance of deference and desire. The evening meal concludes, but the gathering continues. Someone calls for stories, and the hall settles into the comfortable rhythm of communal entertainment that has sustained these people through countless long, dark winters. An elderly skald rises, his voice still strong despite his years, and begins to weave a tale of ancient heroes and distant lands. His words paint pictures more vivid than any illuminated manuscript: warriors crossing storm-tossed seas, kings wooing beautiful queens, gods walking among mortals in disguise. The art of storytelling in Viking culture served multiple purposes beyond mere entertainment. These tales preserved the history and values of the community, taught lessons about honor and courage, and provided a shared cultural vocabulary that bound the listeners together. But they also served as a kind of social lubricant, creating an atmosphere of shared experience and emotion that made other forms of intimacy more possible. In the spell cast by a master storyteller's words, inhibitions naturally relaxed and social boundaries became more permeable. But watch carefully and you'll notice that not everyone remains transfixed by the storyteller's art. Here, a young couple exchange meaningful glances. There, a woman adjusts her brooch, a small gesture, but one heavy with significance in a culture where the way one wore their clothing could communicate volumes about their intentions and availability. The bronze oval brooches that secure her woolen overdress at the shoulders catch the firelight, and she lets one hand drift to the neckline of her linen undertunic, drawing attention to the smooth curve of her throat. These bronze brooches were far more than mere fasteners. They were symbols of status, wealth, and availability. A married woman might wear brooches connected by chains of bronze or silver, the chains themselves serving as a kind of advertisement of her husband's prosperity. An unmarried woman might choose smaller, more delicate ornaments, or arrange her clothing in ways that subtly indicated her interest in changing her single status. The adjustment of a brooch, the loosening of a head covering, the way a woman arranged the folds of her dress, all of these were part of a complex vocabulary of attraction and availability. The man watching her understands the signal perfectly. In Viking society, women had far more control over their romantic destinies than their counterparts in many other medieval cultures. A woman could divorce her husband for something as simple as his wearing shirts cut too low at the chest, considered unseemly and effeminate. She could own property, request compensation for insults to her honor, and yes, she could indicate her interest in a particular man through subtle adjustments to her appearance and behavior. The woolen textiles that formed the basis of Viking clothing were themselves marvels of craftsmanship and communication. The quality of the wool, the fineness of the weave, the richness of the dyes, all spoke to the wearer's status and the skill of the women who had created the garments. A dress dyed with expensive imported indigo or madder root announced prosperity, while intricate tablet-woven trim displayed the needlework skills that were among the most prized feminine accomplishments. Underneath these outer garments, both men and women wore linen underclothing, tunics and leg bindings that provided both warmth and modesty. The linen itself was produced through a laborious process that began with the growing of flax, continued through the complex procedures of retting and hackling the fibers, and concluded with the spinning and weaving that transformed plant matter into fine cloth. The softness and whiteness of one's linen undergarments became a mark of prosperity and cleanliness that held particular appeal in intimate situations. As the skald's tale reaches a particularly engaging passage, perhaps the part where the hero must solve 3 riddles to win his bride, the young woman rises quietly from her place on the bench. She makes a show of needing to tend to something at the far end of the hall, where the shadows gather thick between the carved support posts. Her movement is graceful and deliberate, her footsteps silent on the rush-covered floor. Her admirer waits a respectful moment, then follows, ostensibly to examine the fine workmanship of a tapestry hanging there, but in reality to steal a few precious moments of private conversation. The tapestry that provides their excuse for meeting is itself a testament to the artistic achievements of Viking women. Woven on a vertical loom with wool dyed in rich earth tones, it depicts scenes from the adventures of Thor, the thunder god. The figures are stylized but dynamic, showing Thor battling giants and monsters in defense of both gods and mortals. The borders are decorated with intricate interlaced patterns that seem to move and shift in the flickering firelight, creating an almost hypnotic effect that helps to screen the couple's quiet conversation from curious observers. In the alcove formed by hanging woolen curtains and stored grain barrels, they speak in whispers. Their words are carefully chosen, for even in this semi-private space, they remain within the bounds of propriety that govern all public interactions between unmarried men and women. Yet beneath the surface of their seemingly innocent conversation flows an undercurrent of mutual assessment and growing attraction. "The skald tells the old stories well," she observes, her voice soft but clear. "Indeed," he replies, careful to maintain appropriate distance even as his eyes study her face in the dim light. "Though I sometimes wonder what stories will be told of our own times, centuries hence." The comment reveals his ambition, the Viking desire for lasting fame that drove men to great deeds and distant travels. But it also suggests a more immediate concern with how his own actions and choices might be remembered, including his conduct in courtship and marriage. "Perhaps," she answers with a slight smile, "the stories they tell will be of quieter heroisms, of homes built and families raised, of the courage it takes to love someone completely." Her words indicate not just romantic availability, but a mature understanding of what marriage entailed in Viking society. She is not a young girl dreaming of impossible romance, but a woman ready to build a real partnership with someone worthy of her trust and affection. Their conversation continues in this vein, each comment carefully measured to reveal character while maintaining propriety. They discuss the quality of the evening's mead, which allows her to demonstrate knowledge of household management and him to show appreciation for skilled craftsmanship. They comment on the stories being told, revealing their familiarity with the cultural traditions that bind their community together. They observe the behavior of other couples in the hall, subtly indicating their awareness of courtship conventions and their own interest in participating in them. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the hall, other subtle dramas play out. Near the great carved chair where the household's patriarch held court during the evening's formal proceedings, his eldest son engages in his own careful dance of attraction with the daughter of a visiting trader. Their courtship is more public, more carefully observed, for these are people whose eventual union could forge important economic and political alliances between their families. The young woman sits with perfect posture on a bench covered with thick furs, her bronze and amber jewelry catching the firelight as she moves. Her dress is of the finest wool, dyed a deep blue that speaks of prosperity and good connections. Such rich colors were expensive to produce and maintain. The blue comes from woad, a plant that requires careful cultivation and processing to yield its precious dye. The depth and evenness of the color indicate not just wealth but access to skilled craftspeople who understood the complex chemistry involved in creating lasting, beautiful hues. The keys hanging from her belt are perhaps the most significant symbol of her status and readiness for marriage. In Viking society, the woman who held the keys controlled access to the household's most valuable possessions. The locked chests containing silver and gold, fine textiles, imported spices, and precious objects. The keys marked her as someone trained in the complex responsibilities of managing a wealthy household, someone capable of preserving and increasing a family's prosperity through careful stewardship. Her suitor approaches with the formal courtesy due to her station, but his eyes betray a warmth that has nothing to do with political advantage. He seats himself at a respectful distance and begins a conversation about trade routes and market conditions, topics that allow them both to display their knowledge and intelligence. Yet listen carefully to their words, and you'll hear the underlying personal interest that colors every exchange. The amber traders from the Baltic brought particularly fine stones this season, he observes, his gaze deliberately falling on the magnificent amber beads at her throat. Indeed, she replies, one hand rising unconsciously to touch the jewelry he has complimented, though I find the pieces with insects trapped within them most fascinating. Such perfect preservation of something so delicate, it speaks to the mystery of time itself. The amber she wears represents one of Scandinavia's most valuable natural resources. These golden fossils, washed up on Baltic shores and polished by countless tides, were prized throughout Europe and beyond. Viking traders carried amber as far south as Constantinople and as far east as the markets of Central Asia. The beads around her throat might have been shaped by craftsmen who had never seen the northern forests where the ancient trees once grew, their resins slowly hardening into these precious gems over millions of years. The metaphor in her words is not lost on either of them. In a world where life was uncertain and preservation of anything, family lines, wealth, love itself, required constant vigilance and care, her observation about amber's ability to preserve delicate things carries deeper meaning. They are discussing more than geology. They are exploring the possibility of creating something lasting together, something that might preserve their own delicate beginnings for future generations to admire. Meanwhile, in the alcoves and sleeping spaces that line the walls of the Longhouse, the married couples of the household are engaging in their own intimate rituals. These are not the tentative explorations of new lovers, but the comfortable, well-established patterns of couples who have learned each other's rhythms over months or years of shared life. The sleeping alcoves themselves are marvels of practical design adapted to the constraints of communal living. Each space is just large enough for a sleeping bench covered with straw-filled mattresses and piled with furs and woolen blankets. Wooden chests at the foot of each alcove store personal belongings, clothing, jewelry, small treasures, and the practical items needed for daily life. Shelves carved into the wooden partitions hold oil lamps, combs, and other personal items within easy reach. Behind a curtain woven with protective runes, a farmer and his wife of 15 years prepare for sleep with the unhurried care of people who know they have the rest of their lives to perfect their understanding of each other. The curtain itself tells a story, woven on her own loom with wool from their own sheep, dyed with plants she gathered from their own fields, decorated with symbols meant to protect their family from harm. Every thread represents hours of labor, every pattern a choice made with their shared life in mind. She combs her long hair with a carved antler comb, a wedding gift from her husband's mother that has served her faithfully through all the years of their marriage. The comb's teeth are perfectly shaped and polished smooth, and its handle is decorated with the intertwined initials of their families. The nightly ritual of combing her hair has become one of their most intimate shared moments, a time when the day's cares fall away and they reconnect as husband and wife rather than as partners in the endless labor of survival. He banks the small fire in their private brazier, carefully arranging the coals to provide warmth through the night without risk of accident. The brazier itself is a luxury that marks their prosperity. Most sleeping spaces in the Longhouse depend on the central fires for warmth, but his success as a farmer and trader has allowed him to provide this additional comfort for his wife. The soft glow of the banked coals creates an intimate atmosphere that transforms their small alcove into a private world. Their quiet conversation touches on the mundane concerns of their shared life, which fields need attention, how their children are growing, plans for the approaching winter. Yet there is nothing mundane about the love that has grown between them over the years. When she reaches up to braid her hair for sleep, he steps behind her to help, his fingers gentle and practiced as they weave the golden strands. The braiding is both practical, preventing tangles during sleep, and symbolic, the 3 strands representing the intertwining of their individual lives into something stronger and more beautiful. When he settles onto their shared sleeping bench, she naturally curves her body to fit against his, their movements synchronized by countless nights of such companionship. The sleeping bench is narrow by modern standards, barely wide enough for 2 people, but this constraint has become a source of comfort rather than inconvenience. Their bodies have learned to fit together perfectly, finding warmth and security in their closeness. Their intimacy, when it comes, is unhurried and tender, flavored by the mead they have shared and sweetened by the deep trust that has developed between them. In the Viking world, where marriages were often arranged for practical reasons, the growth of genuine affection and desire between spouses over time was considered one of life's greatest gifts. These couples had learned to find passion within the framework of partnership, desire within the structure of duty. The sounds that drift through the hanging curtains, soft laughter, gentle murmurs, the whisper of linen against skin, paint a picture of relationships that encompass the full spectrum of human connection. These are people who work side by side during the day, who share the burdens of survival in a harsh world, and who find in each other not just physical satisfaction but emotional completion. The physical aspects of their intimacy are informed by a culture that was surprisingly open about sexual matters. Unlike their Christian neighbors, who often viewed physical pleasure with suspicion, Vikings saw sexual satisfaction as a natural and important part of marriage. Their mythology included stories of gods engaging in passionate relationships, and their legal system recognized a woman's right to divorce a husband who failed to satisfy her sexually. Yet this openness was balanced by strong codes of honor and propriety. Adultery was considered a serious crime, punishable by exile or death. Premarital sexual relationships, while not unknown, carried significant social and economic consequences. The balance between acceptance of human sexuality and strict social control created a complex environment where passion was celebrated within proper bounds but harshly punished when it transgressed community standards. In other sleeping spaces, different stories unfold. A young couple married just this past summer still marvel at the miracle of having someone to share their bed legally and openly. Their alcove is decorated with wedding gifts, fine woolen blankets woven by female relatives, carved wooden bowls for their private meals, silver arm rings that mark their new status as married adults. Their movements are less practiced than those of the older couples, but no less tender. They whisper endearments in the darkness, explore each other's bodies with the wonder of lovers who still can hardly believe their good fortune in finding each other. Their marriage had been arranged by their families, as was customary, but they had been blessed with genuine attraction and growing affection. She had first seen him at a spring festival, where his skill at games and his respectful manner toward the older women of the community had caught her attention. The spring festivals were important social events where young people from different communities could meet under appropriate supervision. Games of strength and skill allowed young men to display their prowess, while communal work projects, building a new hall or repairing a bridge, provided opportunities for cooperation and observation of character. He had noticed her quick wit and the graceful way she carried herself, the competence with which she managed the complicated logistics of feeding and housing the festival's many visitors. Her ability to organize and direct the work of other women, her skill at negotiating with merchants and allocating resources, her calm handling of disputes and problems, All of these marked her as someone capable of managing the complexities of a prosperous household. Their wedding night, now several months past, had been both a revelation and a beginning. Like most young Vikings, they had entered marriage with some knowledge of what was expected. Their culture was far more open about sexual matters than many of their Christian neighbors, but knowing and experiencing were vastly different things. The wedding itself had been a community celebration lasting several days, with elaborate feasts, competitions, and rituals designed to ensure the couple's fertility and prosperity. The intervening months had been a gentle education in the art of pleasing each other, of finding the rhythms and techniques that brought mutual satisfaction. They had learned that patience and attention were as important as passion, that the gentle building of desire could be as satisfying as its ultimate fulfillment. Their intimacy had deepened gradually, like a stream carving its channel through stone, creating pathways of pleasure and trust that would serve them throughout their married life. Now, as they lie together in their narrow sleeping space, their quiet exploration continues. Their whispered conversations mix endearments with practical concerns, plans for the future with appreciation for the present moment. They discuss their hopes for children, their dreams of expanding their farm, their observations about the other couples in the community whose marriages they admire and hope to emulate. But not everyone in the Longhouse shares a sleeping space with a spouse or lover. The unmarried members of the household, young men and women, widows and widowers, visitors and guests, navigate a more complex landscape of desire and propriety. The sleeping benches assigned to unmarried men and women are carefully separated, with the most respectable matrons positioned to keep watch over the younger women and ensure that no improper advances are made under cover of darkness. The arrangement of sleeping spaces reflects the community's understanding that human desires do not simply disappear in the darkness, but require careful management to prevent conflicts and preserve reputations. The separation is not absolute. Men and women still share the same hall, still participate in the same evening conversations and entertainment. But physical barriers and social supervision create boundaries that protect the vulnerable while still allowing for appropriate social interaction. Yet even within these constraints, opportunities for intimate connection exist. A young woman lies on her sleeping bench, ostensibly asleep, but actually listening intently to the quiet conversation taking place on the men's side of the hall. A particular voice, the young warrior she noticed during the evening's festivities, rises just loud enough for her to hear his observations about the day's events, his plans for tomorrow's work. She finds herself smiling in the darkness at his wit, pleased by his apparent thoughtfulness toward the older members of the household. The sounds of the settling Longhouse create their own form of intimacy. The soft murmur of conversations gradually fading into sleep, the gentle sounds of couples finding comfort in each other's arms, the crackle of fires being banked for the night, all combine into a symphony of domestic peace that speaks to the deep human need for community and belonging. Their communication is necessarily subtle and indirect. When she rises to tend to the fire in the early hours before dawn, a task that takes her past the sleeping area where he lies, she moves with particular grace, aware that he might be watching. When he volunteers to help carry water for the morning meal preparation, he makes sure to offer assistance in a way that brings him near her workplace, creating opportunities for brief conversations and meaningful glances. These courtship rituals, conducted under the watchful eyes of the community, require a particular kind of creativity and patience. A young man might offer to help with tasks traditionally assigned to women, not an unusual arrangement in Viking society, where practical necessity often overrode rigid gender roles, creating opportunities to work alongside the object of his interest. A young woman might seek advice about some household matter from a man whose wisdom she wishes to test, using the conversation to assess his character and intelligence. The role of the household's thralls, slaves captured in raids or born into bondage, adds another layer of complexity to the Longhouse's intimate dynamics. These men and women, who might have been free farmers or craftspeople before their capture, now occupy a precarious position in the household hierarchy. Some thralls, particularly those who have proven their loyalty and usefulness over time, are treated almost as family members. Others remain clearly marked by their bondage, their sleeping spaces located in the least desirable parts of the hall, their access to the evening's festivities limited by their status. The legal status of thralls was complex and varied. Some had been captured in raids and forced into slavery, while others had been born into bondage or had sold themselves to pay debts. Their treatment depended largely on their skills and the temperament of their owners. A thrall who possessed valuable knowledge, metalworking, textile production, or literacy, might live in conditions barely distinguishable from those of free servants. Others faced a life of harsh labor and minimal comforts. Yet even among the thralls, human nature asserts itself. A thrall woman who has caught the eye of her master must navigate the dangerous waters between rejection, which could bring punishment, and acceptance, which carries its own risks and complications. Some thrall women found protection and even eventual freedom through such relationships, while others found only exploitation and heartbreak. The more privileged thralls, particularly skilled craftspeople or those who had gained their master's trust, sometimes formed relationships among themselves with their owner's tacit approval. A thrall blacksmith might court a thrall woman skilled in textile work, their shared bondage creating a different kind of intimacy, one born of mutual understanding of their precarious position and shared hopes for eventual freedom. The legal system provided some protections even for thralls. A master who killed or seriously injured a thrall without cause could face legal consequences. Female thralls had some protections against sexual abuse, though these were often more theoretical than practical. The most fortunate thralls might eventually earn or purchase their freedom, sometimes with the help of sympathetic free people who had come to value their skills and character. As the night deepens and the Longhouse settles into the deeper rhythms of sleep, the quality of light changes subtly. The central fires burn lower, their flames casting longer, more dramatic shadows across the carved posts and hanging tapestries. Through the smoke hole in the roof, if the night is clear, the cold light of stars penetrates the warm interior, creating pools of silver radiance that seem to transform the familiar space into something more mysterious and magical. The interplay of firelight and starlight creates an atmosphere that seems to exist outside normal time. The familiar objects of daily life, the looms and spinning wheels, the weapons and tools, the chests and benches, take on an otherworldly quality in the shifting light. The carved decorations on the posts and beams seem to move and dance, their intricate patterns creating an almost hypnotic effect that blurs the boundaries between waking and sleeping. In this transformed environment, the boundaries between waking and sleeping, between fantasy and reality, begin to blur. A young woman drifts in and out of dreams filled with images of the warrior who smiled at her across the evening fire. Her dreams are colored by the stories she has heard, the mead she has consumed, and the hopes that fill her heart. She dreams of wedding feasts and shared adventures, of children playing in sunny fields and growing old with someone who truly understands her. A married man reaches unconsciously for his wife in sleep, their bodies finding each other with the automatic intimacy of long partnership. Even in unconsciousness, they are aware of each other's presence, their sleeping forms adjusting and responding to maintain contact and comfort. Their dreams often intertwine, influenced by their shared experiences and mutual understanding. An elderly woman, long widowed, dreams of her departed husband with a vividness that makes her wake with tears on her cheeks and warmth in her heart. In her dreams, they are young again, courting under the summer sun, building their first home together, celebrating the birth of their children. The grief of loss mingles with gratitude for the years they shared, creating a bittersweet emotion that speaks to the depth of love that can develop between two people over a lifetime of shared experience. The Longhouse breathes around its human inhabitants like a living thing, its timber walls expanding and contracting with changes in temperature, its roof beams creaking softly as the night wind passes over them. The building itself seems to hold the memories of all the love and loss, all the passion and tenderness that have played out within its walls over the generations. Each carved post has witnessed countless intimate moments. Each sleeping alcove has sheltered the full spectrum of human emotion and desire. The sounds of the night create their own intimate symphony. The soft whisper of wind through the thatch, the gentle crackle of settling coals, the distant call of night birds, the almost inaudible sounds of dozens of people breathing in sleep, all combine into a lullaby that speaks of safety and community. These sounds are punctuated occasionally by the soft murmur of lovers, the gentle sigh of someone turning in sleep, the quiet footsteps of someone attending to a restless child. Some of the sleepers are visited by dreams sent by the gods, or so they would interpret the vivid visions that come to them in the deep hours of the night. Freya, the goddess who ruled over both love and death, was said to send particularly meaningful dreams to those she favored. A young man might dream of golden fields of barley, symbolizing fertility and abundance in marriage. A woman might see herself weaving cloth that never tears, representing the strong bonds she hopes to create with a future husband. These dreams were not dismissed as mere fantasy, but were considered messages worth pondering and interpreting. The Vikings believed that the boundary between the physical world and the realm of the gods was particularly thin during sleep, and that important guidance about love and relationships could come through the visions that visited them in darkness. Dream interpretation was a recognized skill, and particularly meaningful dreams might be shared with the community and discussed by elders and wise women. The progression of the night follows its own ancient rhythm. In the deepest hours, when even the most restless have found peace and the fires have burned down to glowing embers, the Longhouse achieves a perfect balance of warmth and coolness, sound and silence, community and solitude. This is the time when the most intimate conversations take place, when couples speak in whispers about their deepest hopes and fears, when the barriers of daytime propriety are at their lowest. As the night reaches its deepest point, when even the most ardent lovers have settled into satisfied sleep and the most wakeful guardians have allowed their eyes to close, the Longhouse achieves a kind of perfect balance. The warmth generated by dozens of bodies balances the cold that seeps through the timber walls. The soft sounds of breathing and the occasional murmur of sleep talk create a gentle symphony that speaks of safety and community. The mingled scents of wool and linen, of wood smoke and humanity, of mead and roasted meat, combine into an atmosphere that is utterly distinctive. The smell of home, of belonging, of lives lived fully despite the harsh realities of the medieval world. In this peaceful interlude, with dawn still hours away and the day's labors forgotten in sleep, the true genius of Viking social organization reveals itself. They had created a way of living that honored both individual desires and communal needs, that provided opportunities for privacy within the framework of community, that allowed love and passion to flourish even in the most practical of circumstances. The Longhouse stands as a monument to their understanding that human beings need more than mere survival. They need connection, intimacy, the warmth of shared experience, and mutual care. In building these great halls, the Vikings created spaces that could accommodate the full complexity of human relationships, from the tentative first touches of new love to the comfortable intimacy of couples who had weathered decades together. As the long night slowly turns toward its conclusion, as the first barely perceptible lightening of the sky begins to filter through the smoke hole in the roof, the Longhouse prepares for another day. But for now, in these final hours of darkness and dreams, the community rests in the embrace of ancient rhythms that connect them to countless generations of their ancestors who found love and comfort in similar halls under similar stars. As you drift deeper into the rhythm of their sleeping world, let yourself appreciate the subtle wisdom embedded in every aspect of their domestic arrangements. The careful placement of sleeping areas that provided privacy without isolation. The evening rituals that allowed for both communal celebration and individual courtship. The understanding that in a world where survival demanded cooperation, the relationships between people, romantic, familial, and social, were the foundation upon which everything else was built. Sleep comes gently in this ancient hall, carried on the soft breath of the dying fires and the even softer whispers of lovers settling into dreams. Let it carry you, too, into the deep rest that comes from understanding that you are part of something larger than yourself, surrounded by others who share your hopes and fears, your desires and dreams. In the embrace of this Viking longhouse, with its timber walls holding back the cold and its community of souls holding back the loneliness that can make even the shortest life seem unbearably long, find the peace that comes from belonging, from being known, from being loved. As the longhouse settles into its deepest sleep and the embers of the evening fires cast their final glow across the peaceful faces of the slumbering community, let us drift away from this intimate domestic scene and follow the moonlight across the vast expanse of the North Atlantic. Our journey carries us to the edge of the known world, to the mysterious shores of Vinland, where the sagas tell us one of history's most complex and fascinating women wrote her name in blood and passion across the pages of Viking legend. Picture, if you will, the wild coastline of what would one day be called North America, where massive icebergs drift like floating cathedrals through waters so clear you can see the kelp forest swaying 30 feet below the surface. Here, in this land of endless forests and salmon-rich rivers, where the northern lights dance across skies unmarked by any human settlement, we encounter Freydís Eiríksdóttir, daughter of Eirik the Red, sister to Leif the Lucky, and a woman whose appetites, for power, for adventure, and for love, would become the stuff of legend. The morning mist clings to the shoreline where Freydís stands watching the horizon, her long red-gold hair whipping in the salt wind, her hand resting casually on the pommel of her sword. She is perhaps 30 summers old, in the full bloom of her strength and beauty, her body shaped by years of hard work and harder travel. The woolen cloak that wraps around her shoulders is of the finest quality, dyed a deep green that speaks of prosperity and good connections, pinned at her throat with a silver brooch worked in the shape of intertwined serpents, a design that seems to capture something essential about her nature. But to understand Freydís and the complex web of relationships that defined her life, we must first travel backward through the mists of time to her childhood in Greenland, where the seeds of her legendary passions were first planted in the harsh soil of Viking ambition and family politics. Eirik the Red's daughter grew up in a household where love and war were often indistinguishable, where the boundaries between affection and alliance shifted like pack ice in the spring thaw. Her father, the great explorer who had discovered and colonized Greenland after being exiled from Iceland for murder, was a man whose enormous appetites extended to both conquest and women. The saga tells us he had multiple wives and concubines, and the household of Freydís's childhood was a complex maze of half-siblings, rival mothers, and competing claims for inheritance and affection. In this environment, young Freydís learned early that survival often depended on one's ability to navigate the treacherous currents of desire and manipulation. Watch her as a girl of perhaps 15 summers, already tall and strong for her age, her green eyes sharp with intelligence as she observes the interactions between the adults around her. She sees how her stepmother uses gentle touches and meaningful glances to influence her father's decisions about trade routes and alliances. She watches how her half-brothers compete not just for their father's approval, but for the attention of visiting jarls and their eligible daughters. The young Freydís absorbs these lessons like dry earth soaking up spring rain. She learns that in the Viking world, sexuality and politics are inseparable forces, that a woman's body can be both weapon and shield, that the right marriage alliance can secure a family's prosperity for generations, while the wrong romantic entanglement can lead to exile or death. But she also learns something else, that she possesses a particular kind of magnetism that draws both men and women to her like iron filings to a lodestone. Her first romantic entanglement comes when she is barely 17, with a young warrior named Thorvald who arrives at her father's settlement as part of a trading expedition from Norway. He is everything that should appeal to a young woman: handsome, well-born, skilled with weapons, and possessed of that particular Viking combination of reckless courage and quick wit that made for legendary heroes. Their courtship unfolds against the dramatic backdrop of the Greenland summer, when the sun barely sets and the landscape erupts in a brief explosion of wildflowers and green growth. Imagine them walking together along the shore of the fjord, the midnight sun painting the ice-scattered waters in shades of gold and rose. Thorvald speaks of his plans to join the expeditions to the new lands his brothers have discovered across the western sea. His words paint pictures of vast forests filled with game, of rivers so thick with salmon that you can walk across them on the backs of the fish, of native peoples who possess goods and knowledge unknown in Europe. Freydís listens with growing excitement, but her interest is not merely romantic. Even at 17, she possesses the strategic mind that will later make her both feared and respected throughout the Viking world. She sees in Thorvald not just a potential husband, but a pathway to the kind of adventure and wealth that her position as Eiríksdóttir has taught her to crave. Their physical attraction, while genuine, becomes entangled with larger ambitions almost from the beginning. Their romance unfolds with all the intensity that comes from youth and circumstances. The brief Greenland summer provides a magical backdrop for their courtship: stolen moments in meadows carpeted with Arctic poppies, midnight conversations under skies that never quite darken, passionate embraces sheltered by the massive icebergs that drift past the settlement like floating castles of blue and white crystal. The physical aspects of their relationship develop with a swiftness that would have been scandalous in a more settled community, but here on the edge of the world, surrounded by the constant reminders of life's fragility and uncertainty, conventional propriety seems less important than seizing happiness while it can be grasped. Freydís approaches physical intimacy with the same bold directness she brings to everything else, showing neither the false modesty expected of young women nor the calculating coldness of a purely political alliance. Yet even in the depths of passion, she remains acutely aware of the larger implications of her choices. Thorvald represents more than romance. He offers her a chance to escape the confined world of her father's settlement and to make her own mark on the expanding Viking frontier. When he speaks of the expeditions being planned to explore and settle the new lands, she listens with the focused attention of someone planning her own future. Their affair continues throughout that magical summer, but as autumn approaches and Thorvald's ship prepares to return to Norway, the practical realities of their situation begin to intrude. He speaks of marriage, but his plans involve returning to his family's holdings in Norway to raise the resources needed for the western expeditions. Freydís, however, has no intention of being left behind to wait patiently for his return, or of abandoning her own claims to her father's wealth and status to become merely a wife in a foreign land. The conflict between love and ambition that will define much of her later life first reveals itself during those tense autumn days as Thorvald's departure approaches. Their final conversations are charged with an emotional complexity that goes far beyond simple romantic disappointment. They are negotiating not just the terms of their personal relationship, but the shape of their individual destinies. "Come with me to Norway," Thorvald urges during one of their final private moments together. his hands framing her face as they stand in the shelter of a grove of dwarf birch trees turned golden by the approaching winter. My family has wealth and connections. We can be married before winter, and by spring we'll have the resources to mount our own expedition to Vinland. But Freydís pulls back, her eyes flashing with the independence that will become her trademark. And what of my own inheritance? What of my father's claims in the new lands? Would you have me abandon everything that is mine by right to become dependent on your family's charity? The argument that follows reveals the fundamental incompatibility between her fierce independence and his more conventional expectations of marriage. Thorvald, for all his adventurous spirit, still expects his wife to subordinate her ambitions to his own. Freydís, shaped by growing up in a household where women often wielded considerable informal power, refuses to accept such limitations. When Thorvald's ship disappears over the horizon that autumn, it carries with it Freydís' first taste of the bitter truth that in the Viking world, even the strongest women must often choose between love and independence. The choice she makes, to remain in Greenland and pursue her own path to power and adventure, sets the pattern for all her future relationships. The saga tells us little of her emotional state during the long winter that follows, but we can imagine her standing on the same shore where she had walked with Thorvald, watching the northern lights dance across the star-filled sky, her heart hardening like the sea ice that locks the fjords in place until spring. This is when the legendary Freydís truly begins to emerge, not the romantic young woman who believed love could conquer all obstacles, but the calculating strategist who understands that survival and success require sacrificing some dreams to achieve others. Her next significant relationship comes 2 years later, with a man named Thorvard, who arrives as part of a trading expedition from Iceland. Where Thorvald had been young and romantic, Thorvard is mature and practical, a successful merchant and shipowner whose wealth comes from his skill at navigating both treacherous seas and equally treacherous business negotiations. He is perhaps 40 years old to her 20, possessed of the kind of steady competence that creates prosperity even in the harsh conditions of the North Atlantic settlements. Their courtship is notably different from her passionate affair with Thorvald. This time, Freydís approaches romance with the calculating mind of someone who has learned that love alone is not enough to secure happiness or success. She observes Thorvard carefully, assessing not just his personal qualities but his resources, his connections, and his potential usefulness in achieving her own ambitions. Yet this does not mean their relationship lacks genuine warmth or attraction. Thorvard is drawn to Freydís not just by her beauty, though at 22 she is in her prime, her body strong and graceful from years of hard work, her face marked by the kind of confident intelligence that men find irresistible, but by her quick wit and obvious competence. In their conversations, he finds himself challenged and stimulated in ways that his previous relationships with more conventional women never provided. For her part, Freydís discovers that there can be a different kind of satisfaction in a relationship built on mutual respect and shared ambition rather than blind passion. Thorvard treats her as a partner rather than a possession, consulting her about business decisions and valuing her insights into the complex politics of the Greenland settlements. Their physical relationship, while perhaps less dramatically passionate than her affair with Thorvald, develops a depth and satisfaction that comes from genuine understanding and compatibility. Their marriage, when it comes, is as much a business merger as a romantic union, but this does not diminish its importance in Freydís' life. Thorvard brings to the partnership not just wealth but access to ships and trading networks that will prove crucial to her later adventures. More importantly, he accepts and even encourages her ambitions in ways that few Viking men would have been capable of doing. The early years of their marriage are marked by prosperity and mutual satisfaction. Thorvard's business thrives under the influence of Freydís' strategic mind and her connections to her father's network of allies and trading partners. She, in turn, gains the resources and respectability she needs to begin planning her own expeditions to the new lands her brothers have been exploring. But even in the midst of this domestic success, Freydís remains haunted by dreams of adventure and glory. The stories that filter back from Vinland, tales of vast forests, rich fishing grounds, and the possibility of establishing permanent settlements in a land where no Viking has yet claimed dominion, ignite her imagination and feed her ambitions. She begins to plan her own expedition, using her marriage to Thorvard as a secure base from which to launch her most audacious adventure. The organization of the Vinland expedition reveals Freydís at her most complex and compelling. Working with her husband's resources and her own family connections, she assembles a formidable force of ships and warriors. But her methods of recruitment and organization hint at the darker aspects of her character that will later earn her such a fearsome reputation. Among the men she recruits is a young warrior named Helgi, whose obvious attraction to her she uses to secure his loyalty and that of his followers. Their relationship never becomes overtly sexual. Freydís is too clever to risk her marriage and her reputation so openly, but the undercurrent of mutual desire creates a tension that she manipulates with masterful skill. Watch her as she moves among the men preparing for the expedition, her presence transforming the mundane work of loading supplies and checking equipment into something charged with possibility and excitement. She has learned to use her sexuality as a tool of leadership, offering just enough encouragement to inspire loyalty while maintaining enough distance to preserve her authority. Her conversations with Helgi are masterpieces of subtle manipulation, mixing practical discussions about the expedition with personal exchanges that hint at possibilities without making explicit promises. The new land will offer opportunities for brave men to make their fortunes, she tells him as they stand together on the deck of his ship, the northern wind whipping her unbound hair around her face. A warrior of your skills could easily establish himself as a leader among the settlers, perhaps even found his own settlement. Her words are carefully chosen to appeal to his ambitions while creating a sense of shared destiny. She stands close enough that he can smell the scent of the rare oils she uses to condition her hair, can see the way the sunlight brings out the gold highlights in her green eyes. Yet she maintains just enough physical distance to keep their relationship within the bounds of propriety. Helgi, for his part, finds himself caught between desire and practical calculation. He is attracted to Freydís not just physically, but by her obvious competence and strength of will. Yet he is also aware that she is married to Thorvard, who has invested heavily in the expedition and whose continued support is essential to its success. The resulting tension, between desire and duty, between personal ambition and practical constraints, creates exactly the kind of emotional complexity that Freydís has learned to exploit in her followers. The expedition itself, when it finally departs Greenland, represents the culmination of years of planning and preparation. 3 ships carrying nearly 100 men and women set sail for the unknown shores of Vinland, their holds filled with supplies for establishing a permanent settlement. Freydís stands on the deck of the lead ship, her red-gold hair streaming in the wind, her eyes fixed on the western horizon where her destiny awaits. The journey across the North Atlantic is fraught with the usual dangers, storms that threaten to break the ships apart, icebergs that loom out of the fog like floating mountains, the constant threat of being blown off course into the vast emptiness of the open ocean. But for Freydís, these physical dangers are less challenging than the complex web of relationships and rivalries that develop among the expedition members during the long weeks at sea. The confined space of the ships intensifies every emotion and magnifies every conflict. Freydís finds herself at the center of multiple competing loyalties and desires. Her husband Thorvard, while supportive of her leadership, grows increasingly concerned about the obvious attraction between her and Helgi. Helgi himself becomes more bold in his attentions, perhaps encouraged by the sense that the normal rules of society are suspended during their journey into the unknown. Other members of the expedition also begin to cluster around different leaders, creating factions that threaten the unity essential to their success. Some remain loyal to Thorvard, viewing him as the legitimate leader by virtue of his financial investment in the expedition. Others are drawn to Freydís by her force of personality and her family connections. Still others begin to follow Helgi, seeing in him the kind of warrior leadership they believe will be essential in the new land. Freydís navigates these competing loyalties with the skill of someone trained from childhood in the complex politics of Viking society. She maintains her marriage bond with Thorvard while using her relationship with Helgi to secure the loyalty of the younger, more aggressive members of the expedition. Her conversations with different faction leaders are carefully calibrated to maintain their support while preventing any single group from becoming powerful enough to challenge her authority. The arrival in Vinland brings both triumph and new challenges. The land they discover is everything the earlier explorers had promised: vast forests of oak and maple, rivers thick with salmon, meadows where wild grapes grow in such abundance that they give the land its name. The expedition establishes its base camp in a sheltered bay, where they begin the work of building the permanent structures that will house them through the coming winter. But the very success of their enterprise creates new tensions within the group. The question of how the new land will be divided, who will have authority over the various settlements, and how the profits from trade and resource extraction will be distributed becomes a source of increasingly bitter conflict. Freydís finds herself caught between her role as Thorvard's wife and her own ambitions to claim a position of leadership in the new colony. The crisis comes during the first winter, when the close quarters and harsh conditions intensify all the underlying tensions within the group. The saga tells us that Freydís orchestrated a massacre of rival claimants to authority in the new settlement, personally killing 5 women who had challenged her position. But behind this stark account of violence lies a more complex story of relationships and betrayals, of love and ambition fatally intertwined. The events leading up to the massacre begin with a confrontation between Freydís and the wives of Helgi and his brother Finnbogi, who had arrived in Vinland on a separate ship, but with competing claims to the same territory. These women, Helga, Gudrun, and their companions, represent a direct challenge to Freydís' authority, not just as rivals for political power, but as representatives of a different vision of how the new settlement should be organized. The conflict is intensified by the personal relationships that have developed during their time in Vinland. Helgi's loyalty to Freydís has deepened into something approaching obsession, but his wife Helga is no passive victim of her husband's infatuation. She is herself a formidable woman, skilled in the management of households and alliances, and she recognizes the threat that Freydís represents to her own position and security. The confrontation between these two strong women becomes a proxy for larger questions about the future of the Vinland settlement. Helga advocates for a more conventional arrangement, where authority follows traditional patterns of family relationships and established hierarchies. Freydís, by contrast, argues for a merit-based system where leadership goes to those most capable of ensuring the colony's success, regardless of their gender or marital status. Their final meeting takes place on a bitter winter morning, when the harbor is locked with ice and the only sounds are the creak of the settlement's timber buildings and the distant howl of wolves in the forest. The two women face each other in the main hall of the settlement, their words as sharp as blades, their eyes reflecting the hatred that has grown between them over months of escalating conflict. "You think your marriage to that old traitor gives you the right to rule over women who were born to lead," Helga says, her voice carrying the contempt of someone who sees her rival as an upstart pretender. Freydís replies with the cold precision that has become her trademark. I think my ability to organize this expedition, to secure the resources and allies needed for its success, and to make the hard decisions necessary for survival gives me that right. Your birth means nothing here, where we must all prove ourselves through our actions. The argument that follows escalates beyond mere words. Accusations are made, threats exchanged, alliances revealed and betrayed. When it ends, 5 women lie dead in the snow outside the settlement hall, and Freydís stands over them with blood on her hands and ice in her heart. The saga's account of these events focuses on the violence itself, but the more interesting story lies in the aftermath, when Freydís must deal with the consequences of her actions. The massacre eliminates her immediate rivals, but creates new problems that will haunt her for the rest of her life. Helgi, horrified by the death of his wife, turns against the woman he had once desired, becoming her implacable enemy. Other members of the expedition, while afraid to challenge her directly, begin to see her as someone dangerous and unpredictable. Perhaps most significantly, the murders mark the beginning of the end of her marriage to Thorvard. While he does not openly condemn her actions, indeed, he may have seen them as necessary for the survival of their enterprise, the violence reveals aspects of her character that disturb and alienate him. The woman he had married for her intelligence and ambition has become someone capable of cold-blooded murder, and the knowledge changes something fundamental in their relationship. The journey back to Greenland takes place under a cloud of tension and unspoken recriminations. Freydís maintains her authority through fear rather than loyalty, her followers obeying her commands but no longer offering the enthusiastic support that had characterized the early stages of the expedition. The ships are laden with valuable goods, furs, timber, and other products of the new land, but the human cost of acquiring them has been higher than anyone anticipated. Upon their return to Greenland, Freydís finds herself both celebrated and feared. The material success of the expedition enhances her reputation as a leader and increases her wealth, but stories of the massacre spread throughout the settlement communities, creating a darker legend that will follow her for the rest of her life. She is no longer seen merely as Eirík the Red's ambitious daughter, but as a woman capable of extraordinary violence in pursuit of her goals. The final years of her life are marked by increasing isolation and the gradual dissolution of the relationships that had once sustained her. Thorvard, while remaining nominally her husband, grows increasingly distant, their marriage becoming a mere business partnership rather than a source of personal satisfaction. The younger warriors who had once competed for her attention now approach her with wary respect rather than desire, recognizing the danger that lurks beneath her beauty and charm. Yet even in her isolation, Freydís continues to command a certain fascination. Visitors to the Greenland settlements speak of her with a mixture of admiration and fear, describing a woman whose green eyes seem to hold secrets that lesser mortals cannot fathom, whose very presence charges the air with possibility and danger. She has become a legend in her own lifetime, a figure who embodies both the potential and the perils of the Viking expansion into new worlds. Her legacy in the realm of love and relationships is as complex as her political and military achievements. She represents both the possibilities and the limitations faced by strong women in Viking society, someone who used her sexuality and intelligence to achieve remarkable things, but who ultimately found that the very qualities that brought her success also isolated her from the human connections that make life meaningful. The stories told about her in the years after her death reflect this complexity. Some portray her as a victim of circumstance, a woman whose natural ambitions were corrupted by the violent world in which she lived. Others see her as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked desire and ambition. Still others celebrate her as a pioneer who broke through the barriers that confined most women of her era, achieving a kind of immortality through her refusal to accept conventional limitations. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of her story lies in the hints and suggestions that survive in the saga accounts, the implication that her most intense relationships were with other women, that her conflicts with Helga and the other women she killed were motivated as much by personal passion as by political rivalry. These suggestions, while never explicitly confirmed, add another layer of complexity to her character and help explain the particular intensity of her final conflicts. In the end, Freydís Eiríksdóttir stands as one of history's most fascinating examples of the intersection between personal desire and political ambition, between love and power, between the human need for connection and the drive for individual achievement. Her story reminds us that even in the harsh world of medieval Scandinavia, women could achieve remarkable things, but always at a cost that few were prepared to pay. As we leave her standing on the shore of that distant Greenland fjord, watching the northern lights dance across the star-filled sky, we can imagine her reflecting on the choices that brought her to this moment of isolated triumph. She has achieved more than most women of her era could have dreamed possible, but the path to that achievement has left her fundamentally alone, surrounded by wealth and power, but estranged from the simple human warmth that makes life truly worth living. Her story becomes a meditation on the price of ambition, the cost of refusing to accept the limitations that society places on our dreams. In pursuing her vision of what life could be, she sacrificed much of what makes life meaningful: the trust of loved ones, the comfort of lasting relationships, the peace that comes from accepting our place in the larger community of human experience. Yet there is also something magnificent about her refusal to compromise, her determination to live life on her own terms regardless of the consequences. In an age when most women's stories are told through their relationships to men, as daughters, wives, and mothers, Freydís created a narrative that was entirely her own, a legend that has survived for 1,000 years because it captures something essential about the human spirit's refusal to be contained by conventional boundaries. Let her story carry you now towards sleep, not as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder that the human heart is capable of remarkable things when it refuses to accept the word impossible. In the gentle rhythm of waves against distant shores, in the soft whisper of wind through ancient forests, in the eternal dance of the northern lights across the vast Arctic sky, find the peace that comes from understanding that every life, no matter how complex or conflicted, is part of the larger story of human striving and human dreams. As the legend of Freydís fades into the mists of memory and the northern lights continue their eternal dance across the Arctic sky, let us turn our attention from the grand dramas of individual lives to the quieter mysteries that archaeologists have uncovered in the buried remnants of Viking settlements. Here, in the patient silence of excavated ruins and the whispered secrets carved into stone and bone, we find a different kind of story, one told not through the heroic verses of the sagas, but through the intimate artifacts left behind by ordinary people living their extraordinary lives on the edge of the medieval world. Picture yourself walking through the hushed corridors of a modern museum in the early morning hours, when the galleries are empty except for the soft footsteps of a night guard making his rounds. The display cases hold treasures that few visitors pause to examine closely. Small, seemingly insignificant objects that nonetheless tell profound stories about the most private aspects of Viking life. A carved bone amulet no larger than your thumb. A fragment of wood bearing barely visible runic inscriptions. A bronze pendant shaped in a form that makes museum curators blush and hurry past with their school groups. These artifacts, gathered from archaeological sites across Scandinavia and the Viking diaspora, paint a picture of a culture far more complex and nuanced in its approach to sexuality than the popular imagination might suggest. They reveal a people who saw the sacred and the profane not as opposites but as different aspects of the same fundamental life force, a worldview that allowed them to carve fertility symbols with the same reverence they brought to creating images of their gods, to inscribe body jokes alongside prayers for good harvests, to celebrate human sexuality as both a source of pleasure and a pathway to the divine. In the amber light of the museum's carefully controlled environment, these objects seem to glow with their own inner warmth, as if they still carry something of the passion and humor of the people who created them 1,000 years ago. Let us examine them more closely, allowing their stories to unfold like flowers blooming in the spring thaw, revealing secrets that their makers never intended to hide, but simply expressed in a language that our more prudish modern world has largely forgotten how to read. Begin with a small carved bone pendant discovered in a women's grave in Birka, the great trading center that once flourished on an island in Lake Mälaren, not far from present-day Stockholm. The pendant is exquisitely crafted, its surface polished smooth by centuries of handling, its form unmistakably phallic, yet rendered with an artistic sensibility that transforms what might have been crude into something approaching the sublime. The bone itself comes from a whale, its dense ivory-like material imported at considerable expense from the hunting grounds of the far north. The woman who wore this pendant was clearly someone of means and status. Her grave contained silver arm rings from the markets of Kiev, amber beads from the Baltic shores, and silk fabric that had traveled the entire length of the medieval world from the workshops of Constantinople. Yet among all these precious imports, the bone pendant held a place of particular honor, suspended from a chain of twisted silver that hung close to her heart. Archaeological analysis reveals that the pendant shows extensive wear patterns, suggesting it was handled frequently during the woman's lifetime. The smooth depression worn into the bone by countless thumbs tells us that this was not merely decorative jewelry but a functional object, something that was touched and rubbed with the kind of repetitive motion associated with prayer or meditation. The pendant was, in fact, a fertility amulet designed to invoke the blessings of Freya, the goddess who ruled over both love and abundance. The symbolism would have been immediately clear to any Viking who saw it. The phallus was not seen as crude or shocking, but as a sacred representation of the life force itself, the generative power that ensured the continuation of families and communities. To wear such an amulet was to align oneself with the fundamental energies of creation, to ask for divine assistance in the most essential of human endeavors, the production of the next generation. Similar amulets have been found throughout the Viking world, from the wind-swept shores of Iceland to the river trading posts of Russia. They appear in graves of both men and women, though the examples found with women are often more elaborate and show more evidence of frequent handling. The variation in size, material, and artistic treatment suggests that these were not mass-produced items but individual commissions, each one crafted to meet the specific needs and preferences of its owner. Some of the amulets are barely an inch in length, small enough to be worn discreetly beneath clothing where only the wearer would know of their presence. Others are larger and more elaborate, clearly intended to be visible statements of the wearer's devotion to fertility and abundance. A particularly striking example from a Danish bog deposit shows a phallic pendant carved from amber, the golden resin containing the perfectly preserved remains of an ancient fly, a detail that would have been seen as particularly auspicious, suggesting the preservation of life force across the ages. The craftsmanship evident in these objects speaks to the high regard in which they were held. This was not crude folk art, but sophisticated religious expression, created by skilled artisans who understood both the technical demands of their materials and the spiritual significance of their work. The surface decorations often include runic inscriptions invoking specific blessings or protective formulas, while the overall forms show a deep understanding of human anatomy combined with an aesthetic sensibility that transforms the purely functional into the genuinely beautiful. Move deeper into our imaginary museum, past the display of fertility amulets, to a reconstruction of a sacred grove dedicated to Freya. Here, based on archaeological evidence from sites across Scandinavia, we can glimpse the ritual context in which such objects played their part. The grove would have been located away from the main settlement, in a place where ancient trees created a natural cathedral of living wood and shifting shadow. The centerpiece of such a grove was typically a wooden idol representing the goddess herself, carved from oak or ash and decorated with precious metals and fabrics. Contemporary accounts, filtered through the disapproving lens of Christian chroniclers, describe these idols as explicitly sexual in their symbolism, with exaggerated feminine features that left no doubt about the goddess's dominion over fertility and desire. Around the central idol, the grove would have contained smaller shrines and offering places, each one associated with different aspects of Freya's power. Here, a stone altar where newly married couples came to ask for children. There, a sacred spring where women seeking to conceive would bathe in the cold, clear water while chanting ancient formulas passed down through generations of mothers and grandmothers. The rituals performed in such places were complex affairs that blended the sacred and the sensual in ways that would have seemed perfectly natural to the Vikings, but which shocked their Christian contemporaries. Fertility ceremonies might involve ritual nudity, symbolic sexual acts, and the consumption of specially prepared aphrodisiacs made from herbs and animal products believed to enhance desire and potency. Archaeological evidence for these practices comes from the careful analysis of pollen samples taken from ancient sacred sites. The presence of certain plant species, meadowsweet, juniper, and various fungi, in concentrations far higher than would occur naturally suggests their deliberate cultivation and use in religious contexts. Medieval herbals and later folk traditions provide clues to how these plants were prepared and consumed, creating a picture of sophisticated pharmacological knowledge applied to the enhancement of human sexuality. One particularly intriguing discovery comes from a bog deposit in Jutland, where anaerobic conditions preserved a leather pouch containing what appears to be a complete fertility ritual kit. Along with the expected phallic amulets and runic charms, the pouch contains seeds of various aphrodisiac plants, small bronze vessels for preparing potions, and what appears to be a manual of instructions written in runes on thin sheets of birch bark. The runic text, painstakingly translated by scholars over many years, reveals a complex system of sexual magic that combined practical knowledge with religious belief. The instructions include recipes for love potions, charms for ensuring conception, and rituals for enhancing sexual pleasure and satisfaction. What emerges is a picture of a culture that saw sexuality not as something to be hidden or ashamed of, but as a sacred force to be understood, celebrated, and carefully channeled toward beneficial ends. The bog deposit also contained what may be the most remarkable single artifact of Viking sexual culture, a wooden dildo carved with runic inscriptions and decorated with silver wire. The object, preserved by the acidic bog environment in almost perfect condition, represents a level of craftsmanship and artistic attention that speaks to its sacred rather than merely practical function. The runes include invocations to Freya and formulas for ensuring female sexual satisfaction, suggesting that Viking culture recognized and valued women's sexual pleasure in ways that would not become common in European society for many centuries. The religious context of these objects becomes clearer when we examine the broader patterns of Viking spiritual belief. Freya was not merely a fertility goddess, but one of the most powerful and widely worshipped deities in the Norse pantheon. She was associated with love and desire, but also with death and the afterlife, with magic and prophecy, with wealth and abundance. In her person, the Vikings saw no contradiction between spiritual power and sexual energy. They were simply different expressions of the same fundamental life force. The goddess's own mythology reinforced this connection between sexuality and divinity. The stories told of her numerous lovers, both divine and mortal, and of her willingness to use sexual attraction as a tool for achieving her goals. One famous tale describes how she spent 4 nights with 4 dwarven craftsmen in exchange for a magnificent golden necklace called Brisingamen, while another tells of her marriage to Ar, whose frequent absences drove her to tears of gold. These stories were not seen as scandals, but as examples of divine behavior worthy of emulation. Freya's sexual freedom was part of her power, not a limitation upon it, and this understanding influenced how the Vikings approached sexuality in their own lives. The goddess provided a model of how sexual desire could be embraced and celebrated rather than suppressed or hidden. The physical remains of Freya's temples and shrines provide additional evidence for the central role of sexuality in Viking religious practice. Excavations at sites like Gamla Uppsala in Sweden have revealed ritual deposits containing large numbers of phallic objects, fertility amulets, and other sexually symbolic artifacts. The sheer quantity of such finds suggests that fertility rituals were not occasional ceremonies but regular, frequent observances that drew participants from wide areas. Carbon dating of organic materials from these sites indicates that the fertility cults remained active well into the Christian period, suggesting that the older religious traditions were deeply embedded in popular culture and not easily displaced by the new faith. Indeed, some Christian churches built on former pagan sites show clear evidence of continued fertility ritual activity, with phallic carvings and runic inscriptions appearing alongside Christian symbols in a syncretic blend that would have horrified church authorities had they been aware of it. The persistence of these traditions is perhaps most clearly visible in the runic graffiti that appears throughout the Viking world, carved into the wooden walls of houses, scratched into stone surfaces, and even inscribed on church walls by Vikings who had nominally converted to Christianity but retained their ancestors' more relaxed attitudes toward sexuality. Walk now through the reconstructed interior of a Viking longhouse, your fingers tracing the barely visible runic inscriptions that archaeologists have painstakingly recorded and translated. Here, carved into a support post at eye level, is a short verse that roughly translates as, "Helga has fine breasts and knows how to use them." There, scratched into the wooden wall near a sleeping alcove, is a more elaborate composition describing in remarkably explicit detail the sexual preferences of someone named Thorvald. These graffiti reveal a culture with a robust tradition of sexual humor and an openness about bodily functions that contrast sharply with the prudish attitudes that would later dominate European culture. The inscriptions are often witty and clever, showing the same appreciation for wordplay and double meaning that characterizes the best of Viking poetry. They represent not crude vandalism but a legitimate form of folk expression, a way of celebrating human sexuality through the medium of the written word. Some of the inscriptions clearly serve practical purposes, functioning as a kind of primitive sexual advertising. A runic message carved near a market square in York identifies a woman named Astrid as someone who provides certain services for a reasonable fee, while another inscription in Bergen appears to be a testimonial to the skills of a particular practitioner of sexual massage. The technical vocabulary revealed in these inscriptions is remarkably sophisticated, with precise terms for various sexual acts and anatomical features that demonstrate a culture comfortable with explicit sexual discussion. The runes provide words for concepts that other medieval languages could barely express, suggesting that Viking society had developed a rich and nuanced understanding of human sexuality that extended far beyond the basic biological functions. Perhaps most intriguingly, many of the inscriptions reveal evidence of sexual practices that challenge conventional assumptions about Viking gender roles and sexual norms. References to same-sex relationships, while not common, are present and appear to be discussed without particular condemnation or surprise. More frequent are inscriptions describing sexual practices that involve female dominance or male submission, suggesting that Viking sexual culture was more varied and flexible than the warrior stereotypes might suggest. The quality and sophistication of some runic sexual graffiti approaches the level of formal poetry, with complex alliterative patterns and mythological references that demonstrate considerable learning on the part of their creators. A particularly striking example from a church wall in Iceland presents a sexual encounter as a cosmic battle between the forces of creation and destruction, using mythological imagery to transform what might have been crude description into something approaching religious allegory. These inscriptions also provide evidence for the use of sexual magic and ritual in everyday life. Runic formulas for enhancing sexual performance, ensuring conception, or binding a lover's affections appear alongside more mundane messages about trade agreements and family matters. The magical applications of sexuality were clearly seen as natural extensions of religious practice rather than as separate occult traditions. The archaeological record also preserves evidence of more elaborate sexual rituals and practices. Excavations at high-status sites have revealed what appear to be specialized spaces designed for sexual activity, with features that suggest ceremonial rather than purely private use. These spaces are often located in association with religious structures or burial sites, reinforcing the connection between sexuality and spiritual practice. One particularly intriguing discovery comes from a nobleman's hall in Norway, where archaeologists uncovered a small chamber containing elaborate furnishings and decorations that appear to have been designed for ritual sexual activity. The room contained silk cushions, silver vessels for serving wine or mead, and walls decorated with erotic imagery carved in relief. Most significantly, the floor showed evidence of ritual fires, suggesting that sexual activity in this space was accompanied by ceremonial burning of incense or other aromatic substances. Chemical analysis of soil samples from the floor revealed traces of various psychoactive plants, including species of mushrooms known to have hallucinogenic properties. This suggests that some Viking sexual rituals may have involved the use of consciousness-altering substances, creating experiences that blended physical pleasure with spiritual transcendence. The presence of such elaborate ritual spaces in high-status contexts suggests that sexual ceremonies were not merely folk practices, but were integrated into the religious and social activities of the Viking elite. The investment of significant resources in creating specialized environments for sexual ritual indicates that these practices were seen as important contributions to community welfare and spiritual health. Similar evidence has been found at sites throughout the Viking world, from Iceland to Russia, indicating that these were not isolated local customs but widespread cultural practices. The consistency of the archaeological evidence suggests a shared understanding of sexuality's role in religious and social life that transcended the boundaries of individual kingdoms or communities. The artifacts and inscriptions also reveal the existence of professional practitioners who specialized in sexual magic and fertility rituals. References in runic inscriptions and legal documents describe individuals who were consulted for problems related to sexual dysfunction, infertility, and relationship difficulties. These practitioners, often women, appear to have possessed sophisticated knowledge of herbal medicine, psychology, and ritual technique. The legal status of such practitioners was complex and varied by region and time period. Some appear to have operated openly as respected members of their communities, while others faced legal restrictions or religious persecution as pagan practices came under increasing pressure from Christian authorities. The survival of their practices well into the medieval period suggests that their services filled genuine needs that the new Christian culture was unable or unwilling to address. Evidence for their activities comes from a variety of sources, including medical texts that describe treatments for sexual problems, legal documents that regulate their practice, and archaeological finds of their professional equipment. A particularly rich source of information comes from the preserved contents of a practitioner's grave from Denmark, which contained an extensive collection of herbs, amulets, and ritual implements, along with what appears to be a manual of procedures written in runes. The grave goods suggest that sexual healing was seen as a legitimate medical specialty requiring extensive training and sophisticated knowledge. The practitioner appears to have been a woman of considerable status, buried with silver jewelry and imported goods that indicate wealth and social standing. Her professional equipment included not only the expected fertility amulets and herbal preparations, but also surgical instruments and what appear to be early forms of contraceptive devices. The contraceptive technology revealed in archaeological contexts shows that Vikings had developed relatively sophisticated methods for controlling reproduction. Analysis of organic materials from women's graves has revealed traces of various plant-based substances known to have contraceptive or abortifacient properties, while metal and bone objects appear to have functioned as primitive intrauterine devices. This technological sophistication reflects a culture that saw sexuality as something to be managed and controlled rather than simply accepted as an uncontrollable natural force. The availability of contraceptive methods would have given Viking women considerably more control over their reproductive lives than was common in other medieval societies, contributing to the relatively high status that women enjoyed in Viking culture. The archaeological evidence also suggests that Vikings had developed treatments for various forms of sexual dysfunction. Herbal preparations found in medical contexts include plants known to enhance libido and sexual performance, while physical artifacts suggest treatments for problems like erectile dysfunction and painful intercourse. The sophistication of these treatments indicates a mature understanding of human sexuality that recognized the importance of sexual satisfaction for overall health and well-being. As we move through this archaeological landscape of desire and devotion, of sacred sexuality and profane pleasure, what emerges is a picture of a culture that had achieved a remarkable integration of the physical and spiritual aspects of human experience. The Vikings saw no fundamental contradiction between religious devotion and sexual pleasure, between spiritual seeking and bodily satisfaction. Their approach to sexuality was holistic, recognizing it as a force that operated simultaneously on physical, emotional, social, and spiritual levels. This integration is perhaps most clearly visible in the artistic treatment of sexual themes in Viking material culture. Erotic imagery appears not only in obviously sexual contexts, but also in religious art, decorative metalwork, and even weapons and tools. A sword pommel might be decorated with fertility symbols, a woman's brooch might incorporate phallic elements, a ship's prow might feature explicitly sexual imagery intended to ensure favorable winds and calm seas. The artistic quality of these sexual representations is consistently high, showing the same level of craftsmanship and aesthetic sophistication found in other areas of Viking art. This suggests that sexual themes were not considered inferior or degraded subjects, but were worthy of the same artistic attention devoted to religious or mythological topics. The integration of sexual symbolism into everyday objects also indicates that sexuality was not compartmentalized or hidden, but was seen as a natural and beneficial part of daily life. The presence of fertility symbols on household items, agricultural tools, and personal ornaments created an environment where sexual energy was constantly acknowledged and celebrated rather than suppressed or ignored. This openness about sexuality extended to the treatment of sexual diversity and variation. While heterosexual marriage and reproduction remained the cultural norm, archaeological evidence suggests that other forms of sexual expression were tolerated and sometimes celebrated. Graves containing individuals buried with artifacts typically associated with the opposite gender may indicate recognition of what we would now call transgender or non-binary identity, while artistic representations suggest familiarity with a wide range of sexual practices and preferences. The overall picture that emerges from the archaeological record is one of a culture that had achieved a remarkably sophisticated and nuanced understanding of human sexuality. Far from being the crude barbarians of popular stereotype, the Vikings had developed approaches to sexual health, pleasure, and spiritual integration that in many ways surpassed those of their supposedly more civilized contemporaries. As we conclude our journey through this museum of intimate artifacts and sacred sexuality, let the gentle whisper of ancient wisdom carry you toward sleep. In the soft glow of carefully controlled lighting, these objects speak across the centuries of a people who understood that the human body is sacred, that pleasure is a gift to be celebrated, that the deepest spiritual truths are often expressed through the most fundamental physical experiences. The runes carved into stone and bone, the amulets worn close to beating hearts, the ritual spaces where sacred and profane merged into something greater than either could achieve alone. All of these remind us that sexuality, approached with wisdom and reverence, can be a pathway to understanding the deepest mysteries of existence. Let their stories of integration and acceptance, of pleasure consecrated and bodies blessed, soothe away the tensions and contradictions of modern life. In the patient silence of archaeological time, where objects wait for millennia to tell their stories, find the peace that comes from understanding that human sexuality, in all its complexity and variety, has always been part of the great pattern of existence, deserving of respect, celebration, and wonder. Sleep now in the embrace of this ancient wisdom, surrounded by the gentle spirits of people who lived and loved with a fullness and openness that still has much to teach us about what it means to be fully human. As the whispered secrets of ancient runes fade into the patient silence of museum halls and the last traces of archaeological mystery dissolve into memory, let us ascend from the realm of common folk and sacred groves to the rarefied atmosphere of Viking high society. Here, in the private chambers of jarls and their ladies, where silk hangings flutter in the warm air rising from silver braziers and the scent of exotic perfumes mingles with the smoke of precious incense, we discover a world where sexuality becomes intertwined with the complex choreography of power, wealth, and political ambition. Picture yourself climbing the narrow wooden stairs that lead to the upper levels of a great hall in 10th century Denmark, your feet silent on the polished oak steps, your breath visible in the cooler air above the main hearth. The sounds of the common hall, the chatter of servants, the clatter of cooking pots, the laughter of children, fade behind you as you enter a realm where every detail has been carefully orchestrated to create an atmosphere of luxury and refinement that speaks to the almost unlimited resources at the disposal of the Viking elite. The chamber you enter is a marvel of medieval craftsmanship and international commerce, a space that brings together the finest products of a trade network that stretched from Greenland to Constantinople, from the amber shores of the Baltic to the spice markets of Baghdad. The walls are hung with tapestries woven from silk so fine it seems to shimmer with its own inner light, the precious threads having traveled thousands of miles along the great trade routes that connected the Viking world to the wealthy empires of the south and east. These silk hangings are more than mere decoration. They are statements of power and connectivity, visible proof that their owner commands resources sufficient to purchase the most exotic and expensive goods available in the medieval world. The silk itself tells stories of distant lands and dangerous journeys, of caravans crossing vast deserts and ships navigating treacherous seas to bring these treasures to the cold northern courts where they will be transformed into symbols of status and sophistication. The patterns woven into the silk reveal the cosmopolitan nature of Viking elite culture. Here, Byzantine eagles spread their wings in golden thread against a background of imperial purple. There, Sasanian lions hunt eternal prey through stylized forests of silver and blue. Chinese dragons coil through clouds of pearl-white silk, while Islamic geometric patterns create mesmerizing designs that seem to shift and change in the flickering light of oil lamps burning perfumed whale oil in silver holders. But it is not only the visual splendor of these chambers that creates their distinctive atmosphere. The air itself is heavy with scents that speak of wealth and refinement. Frankincense and myrrh from the markets of Arabia, sandalwood and cinnamon from the spice islands of the distant Indies, ambergris from whales beached on remote shores, and rose attar distilled in the workshops of Persia. These precious substances are burned in elaborate censers wrought of silver and gold, their smoke curling upward to collect among the silk hangings like visible prayers to gods of pleasure and abundance. The furniture in these elite chambers reflects the same commitment to luxury and display. Low couches are covered with furs from Arctic foxes and polar bears, their white pelts providing striking contrasts to the rich colors of silk cushions stuffed with the finest down from elder ducks. Tables carved from imported woods, ebony from Africa, sandalwood from India, display collections of precious objects that serve both decorative and functional purposes in the complex rituals of elite courtship and seduction. Among these treasures, none are more significant than the vessels used for serving wine and mead in the private ceremonies that mark the highest levels of Viking social interaction. These are not the simple drinking horns of the common hall, but masterworks of the goldsmith's art, their surfaces decorated with intricate relief carvings that tell stories of divine love and mortal passion. A silver chalice might depict the marriage of Freya and Ar, while a golden bowl shows the courtship of Sif by Thor, each scene rendered with an artistic sophistication that transforms these utilitarian objects into works of religious and erotic art. The wine served in these precious vessels is itself a luxury beyond the dreams of common Vikings. Imported from the vineyards of Francia and the Byzantine Empire, stored in chambers carved deep into the earth where the temperature remains constant throughout the year, these wines represent an investment of resources that could have fed entire villages for months. Yet for the Viking elite, such wine is not merely an indulgence but a necessary tool in the complex negotiations that govern relationships at the highest levels of society. Watch now as servants, not the rough thralls who labor in the fields and workshops, but carefully selected and trained individuals whose very appearance has been crafted to enhance the atmosphere of refined sensuality, prepare the chamber for the evening's entertainment. These servants move with the quiet efficiency of dancers, their every gesture choreographed to create an experience that engages all the senses simultaneously. A young woman, perhaps from Ireland or the Frankish kingdoms, her beauty enhanced by careful grooming and costly ornaments, arranges fresh flowers in silver vases placed throughout the chamber. The flowers themselves are rarities in the northern climate, roses cultivated in sheltered gardens, lilies forced to bloom out of season in heated rooms, exotic blooms imported as dried specimens and carefully rehydrated to create the illusion of eternal spring even in the depths of winter. Her movements are graceful and deliberate, each gesture designed to draw attention to her own physical attributes while serving the practical purpose of preparing the space. She wears a dress of fine linen dyed a soft blue-green, the color achieved through expensive imported indigo mixed with woad to create a hue that complements her fair skin and auburn hair. The dress itself is cut in a style that flatters her figure while remaining within the bounds of propriety, though those bounds are considerably more flexible in the private chambers of the elite than they would be in the common areas of the hall. As she works, other servants attend to different aspects of the chamber's preparation. A young man from the Eastern Territories, his features suggesting Slavic ancestry, tends to the braziers that provide both warmth and light, adjusting the mixture of woods and aromatics to create exactly the right balance of heat and scent. His tunics are of silk rather than wool, their rich red color and elaborate embroidery marking him as a valued member of the household rather than a simple laborer. These servants are not merely functional elements in the chamber's operation, they are integral parts of the aesthetic and sensual experience that the Viking elite have created to distinguish themselves from their social inferiors. Their beauty, their refinement, their obvious training in the arts of service and pleasure all contribute to an atmosphere where sexuality becomes inseparable from displays of wealth and power. The relationship between masters and servants in these elite households is complex and layered, governed by unwritten rules that acknowledge both the theoretical absolute power of the owners and the practical reality that valuable servants must be treated with sufficient care to maintain their loyalty and effectiveness. The most prized servants, those whose beauty, intelligence, or special skills make them particularly valuable, enjoy a status that approaches that of free retainers, with comfortable quarters, fine clothing, and considerable autonomy in their daily activities. Yet beneath this surface refinement lies the ever-present reality of bondage, and the knowledge that even the most privileged servant remains fundamentally at the mercy of their owner's whims. This tension between comfort and constraint, between apparent privilege and ultimate powerlessness, creates an undercurrent of psychological complexity that influences every interaction between masters and servants in these rarefied environments. As the chamber reaches its perfect state of preparation, we witness the entrance of its primary occupants, a jarl and his lady, members of the highest tier of Viking society, whose every gesture and word carries the weight of generations of accumulated wealth and political power. They move through their domain with the unconscious authority of those born to command, yet their interactions with each other and with their servants reveal the subtle negotiations and careful calculations that govern relationships at this level of society. The Jarl himself is a man in his middle years, his body still powerful despite the softening effects of comfortable living, his bearing that of someone accustomed to having his wishes anticipated and fulfilled without question. His clothing is a study in understated magnificence, a tunic of silk so finely woven it seems almost translucent, dyed a deep blue that speaks of connections to the most exclusive trading networks, embroidered with silver thread in patterns that reference both his family's ancient lineage and his personal achievements in war and diplomacy. His lady, for at this level of society, marriages are partnerships between equals rather than relationships of dominance and submission, matches his refinement with her own displays of wealth and sophistication. Her dress is of silk even finer than his tunic, its pale gold color achieved through the use of saffron imported at enormous expense from the distant Mediterranean. The garnets and pearls that adorn her neck and wrists tell stories of successful raids and profitable trading expeditions, while the intricate gold work of her jewelry speaks to the patronage of the finest craftsmen available in the medieval world. Yet it is not merely their clothing and ornaments that mark these individuals as members of the elite. It is the subtle refinement of their manners, the careful modulation of their voices, the unconscious grace of their movements that reveal generations of breeding and training in the arts of sophisticated social interaction. They have been raised from birth to understand that at their level of society, every gesture carries meaning, every word has consequences, and every relationship must be carefully managed to maintain and enhance their family's position in the complex hierarchy of Viking political life. Their conversation, as they settle into their luxurious surroundings, touches on topics that would be foreign to the concerns of common Vikings. They discuss the political implications of a proposed marriage alliance with a powerful family in Norway, debate the wisdom of investing in a new trading expedition to the Byzantine Empire, and consider the delicate question of how to respond to overtures from Christian missionaries who seek to establish themselves in their territory. Yet beneath these practical considerations flows an undercurrent of personal desire and intimate attraction that transforms even the most mundane political discussion into a form of sophisticated foreplay. Watch how the lady's eyes linger on her husband's face as he describes his negotiations with foreign traders, how her fingers trace patterns on the silk of her dress as she considers the strategic implications of various diplomatic options. Observe how the Jarl's voice takes on a subtly different quality when he speaks directly to his wife, how his formal manner softens almost imperceptibly in response to her presence. Their relationship is a masterpiece of balance between the personal and the political, between genuine affection and strategic calculation. They were married not for love, though love has grown between them over the years, but to cement an alliance between two powerful families whose combined resources could dominate the political landscape of their region. Yet within this framework of practical arrangement, they have created a partnership that encompasses both deep mutual respect and genuine physical attraction. The evening's entertainment begins with the arrival of guests, other members of the elite who have been invited to participate in the kind of sophisticated social gathering that serves multiple purposes in Viking high society. These events are simultaneously diplomatic conferences, cultural salons, and elaborate courtship rituals where marriages are arranged, alliances negotiated, and the complex web of relationships that governs elite society is continuously rewoven. The guests who enter the silk-hung chamber represent the cream of Viking aristocracy, men and women whose names are known throughout the northern world, whose decisions influence the fates of kingdoms, and whose personal relationships can determine the course of history. They move through the space with the confidence of those who belong in such surroundings, their clothing and ornaments marking them immediately as members of the same exclusive caste as their hosts. Among them is a young woman whose presence adds a particular electricity to the gathering, the unmarried daughter of a powerful jarl from Sweden, whose beauty and intelligence have made her one of the most sought-after marriage prospects in the Viking world. She is perhaps 20 years old, in the full bloom of her attractiveness, her golden hair arranged in elaborate braids that cascade down her back like spun sunlight, her dress of white silk embroidered with silver thread that catches and reflects the lamplight with every movement. Her arrival transforms the atmosphere of the chamber as every unmarried man present, and some of the married ones, becomes acutely aware of her presence. Yet she navigates this attention with the skill of someone trained from childhood in the arts of diplomatic flirtation, offering just enough encouragement to maintain the interest of potential suitors while avoiding any commitment that might limit her family's negotiating position. Watch her as she moves through the gathering, her conversation a masterpiece of wit and intelligence that demonstrates both her excellent education and her understanding of the complex social dynamics at play. She speaks knowledgeably about poetry and law, displays familiarity with the latest news from trading expeditions to distant lands, and shows an appreciation for fine craftsmanship that marks her as someone who will be able to manage the complex domestic arrangements required of a high-status wife. Yet beneath this display of accomplishment lies a more subtle performance designed to assess and attract potential marriage partners. She allows her gaze to linger meaningfully on certain men while pointedly ignoring others, creating a hierarchy of interest that reflects not only her personal preferences but also her family's strategic priorities. Her laughter rings out at particularly clever remarks. Her attention focuses intently on discussions of topics she finds genuinely engaging, and her body language subtly encourages or discourages approaches from different suitors. The men present respond to her performance with their own displays of wealth, intelligence, and desirability. A young jarl from Norway regales the company with tales of his recent expedition to the markets of Kiev, his stories carefully chosen to demonstrate both his adventurous spirit and his business acumen. His descriptions of the exotic goods he has acquired and the profitable relationships he has established paint a picture of someone capable of providing not only material security, but also the kind of exciting lifestyle that appeals to ambitious young women. Another suitor, this one from Denmark, takes a different approach, engaging the young woman in discussions of poetry and saga, demonstrating his cultural sophistication and his ability to provide intellectual companionship as well as material prosperity. His conversation reveals wide reading and deep thinking, qualities that would make him an attractive partner for someone who values mental stimulation as highly as physical comfort. The interplay between these various suitors and their intended prize creates a complex web of attraction, competition, and calculation that influences every interaction in the chamber. Yet this is not crude rivalry but sophisticated social theater, where each participant understands the rules of engagement and plays their role with the skill of accomplished performers. Meanwhile, the married couples present engage in their own subtle games of attraction and influence. The boundaries between friendship and flirtation blur in the rarefied atmosphere of elite society, where personal relationships are always entangled with political considerations and where the line between appropriate social interaction and potentially scandalous behavior is constantly being negotiated and renegotiated. The host and hostess move through their guests with the practiced ease of experienced diplomats, their conversations touching on personal matters, political concerns, and cultural interests with equal facility. They are simultaneously entertainers and power brokers, friends and rivals, their every word and gesture carefully calibrated to advance their family's interests while maintaining the delicate balance of relationships that keeps elite society functioning. As the evening progresses and the wine flows more freely, the conversations become more intimate and the social boundaries more permeable. The formal courtesies that govern public interaction begin to soften, replaced by the more personal exchanges that reveal the individual personalities beneath the aristocratic facades. In one corner of the chamber, a mature couple who have been married for many years engage in quiet conversation with another pair, their discussion touching on the challenges and rewards of maintaining successful partnerships at the highest levels of society. Their words reveal the deep understanding that can develop between people who have shared not only personal intimacy, but also the complex responsibilities of managing wealth, power, and political influence. Marriage at our level is like commanding a ship in dangerous waters, the older woman observes, her voice pitched low enough that only her immediate companions can hear. Success requires not only skill and courage, but also the ability to work in perfect harmony with your partner, each anticipating the other's thoughts and actions before they are expressed. Her husband nods in agreement, his hand finding hers in a gesture that speaks of long intimacy and mutual support. The storms we weather together make us stronger, he adds, but they also reveal aspects of character that cannot be discovered in the calm waters of courtship. The true test of any union comes not in the early days of passion, but in the long years of shared responsibility. Their companions, a younger couple married only a few years, listen intently to this wisdom, their own relationship still in the phase where political necessity and personal attraction are learning to coexist and hopefully merge into something deeper and more lasting. The younger woman asks thoughtful questions about managing the competing demands of family loyalty and marital partnership, while her husband seeks advice about balancing his own ambitions with his responsibilities to his wife's family and interests. These conversations, taking place in the intimate atmosphere of the silk-hung chamber, reveal the complex emotional landscape of elite Viking marriage. These are relationships that must function simultaneously as business partnerships, diplomatic alliances, and personal unions, where success requires not only physical attraction and emotional compatibility, but also shared commitment to larger goals and values. In another part of the chamber, a different kind of conversation is taking place between the young Swedish woman and one of her more serious suitors. They have found a semi-private alcove where silk hangings create the illusion of separation from the larger gathering, and their discussion has moved beyond the general topics suitable for public entertainment to more personal matters. "I find myself curious about your thoughts on the management of household affairs," the young man says, his question carefully phrased to be both practical and respectful. "The stories of your mother's skill in organizing her husband's trading enterprises have reached even our remote corner of Norway." The compliment is skillfully delivered, acknowledging both the young woman's family connections and her potential for following in her mother's footsteps. It also reveals the suitor's understanding that at the elite level, Wives are expected to be active partners in their husband's business and political activities rather than merely decorative appendages to male power. "My mother taught me that a successful household is like a well-run ship," she replies, her answer demonstrating both practical knowledge and strategic thinking. Every member of the crew must understand their role and be committed to the common goal, but the captain and first mate must work in perfect coordination if the vessel is to reach its destination safely. The metaphor she chooses reveals her understanding of marriage as a partnership of equals, each with distinct but complementary roles, working together toward shared objectives. It also demonstrates her familiarity with the maritime culture that forms the foundation of Viking civilization, marking her as someone who truly understands the world she has been born into. Their conversation continues in this vein, each question and answer serving multiple purposes, assessing compatibility, demonstrating desirability, and laying the groundwork for more formal negotiations between their families. Yet beneath the practical considerations flows a current of genuine personal interest, as each tries to determine whether the other might be someone with whom they could build not just a successful political alliance, but also a satisfying personal relationship. The physical tension between them is palpable but carefully controlled, expressed through meaningful glances, subtle changes in posture, and the occasional accidental touch as they reach for wine cups or adjust their positions in the small alcove. They are both aware that they are being observed by other guests and that their behavior will be reported back to their respective families, so their attraction must be expressed within carefully defined boundaries. Meanwhile, the servants continue to move through the chamber, their presence adding another layer of complexity to the social dynamics at play. These individuals, selected and trained to serve the needs of the elite, understand that their own futures depend on their ability to navigate the shifting currents of their master's desires and ambitions. The Irish woman who arranged the flowers earlier now serves wine to the guests, her movements graceful and unobtrusive, her beauty adding to the overall aesthetic of the gathering without intruding on the relationships being negotiated among the freeborn participants. Yet she is not merely a passive element in the scene. Her intelligence and sensitivity make her valuable as an informal source of information about guest preferences and reactions, knowledge that her mistress will later use to refine her own social strategies. The relationship between this servant and her noble mistress is complex and layered, governed by a mixture of genuine affection, mutual dependence, and the ever-present reality of fundamental inequality. The servant has been with the family for many years, brought to the household as a young girl captured in a raid on the Irish coast, but her intelligence and usefulness have earned her a position of trust and relative privilege. She sleeps in comfortable quarters near her mistress's chamber, wears clothing of good quality and attractive design, and enjoys freedoms that would be unthinkable for common thralls. Yet she remains fundamentally dependent on her owner's goodwill, and both women understand that this relationship, however warm it may appear on the surface, is built on foundations of power and ownership rather than equality and choice. The psychological complexity of this relationship influences every interaction between them. The servant's genuine loyalty and affection are colored by her understanding that her well-being depends entirely on maintaining her mistress's favor. The mistress's fondness for her servant is complicated by her awareness that this fondness is itself a form of power, a gift that can be withdrawn at any time if circumstances change. This dynamic is further complicated by the servant's beauty and intelligence, qualities that make her valuable not only as a domestic worker, but also as a potential source of information about the household's guests and their private conversations. Her ability to move invisibly through elite social settings, observing and remembering details that might escape the notice of the participants themselves, makes her an important asset in the complex game of aristocratic politics. Other servants in the chamber occupy different positions in the household hierarchy, each relationship shaped by factors of origin, skill, personal attractiveness, and length of service. A young man who tends the braziers was born into slavery, the son of thralls who have served the family for generations, but his intelligence and reliability have earned him opportunities for advancement that might eventually lead to freedom and a place among the family's free retainers. A woman who assists with the more intimate aspects of her mistress's toilette was acquired through purchase from a trader who specialized in acquiring and training high-quality domestic servants. Her beauty and accomplishments make her valuable, but also potentially dangerous, as her proximity to family secrets and her access to private spaces create opportunities for both service and betrayal. The presence of these servants adds another dimension to the evening's entertainment, as guests assess not only their host's wealth and taste, but also the quality of their household management and the loyalty of their dependents. In a world where political alliances can shift suddenly and violent conflicts can erupt without warning, the reliability of one's domestic staff becomes a matter of life and death as well as social standing. As the evening reaches its peak, with wine and conversation flowing freely and the boundaries between public and private behavior becoming increasingly blurred, the true purpose of such gatherings reveals itself. These are not merely social events, but crucial mechanisms for maintaining and reshaping the complex web of relationships that governs elite Viking society. Marriages are being contemplated and negotiations begun, business partnerships explored, and political alliances tested. The young Swedish woman finds herself the center of increasingly serious attention from her Norwegian suitor, their conversation moving beyond general topics to more specific discussions of expectations and possibilities. Other guests form and reform conversational groups, each interaction serving multiple purposes in the endless process of alliance building and status negotiation that occupies so much of aristocratic life. The host and hostess move through these various conversations with the skill of experienced orchestrators, subtly guiding interactions toward productive outcomes while ensuring that no guest feels neglected or uncomfortable. They understand that their reputation as hosts depends not only on the luxury of their appointments and the quality of their entertainment, but also on their ability to create an atmosphere where important business can be conducted with pleasure and satisfaction for all participants. As the night deepens and the gathering becomes more intimate, some guests begin to take their leave, departing in pairs or small groups to continue their conversations in other settings or simply to return to their own chambers and reflect on the evening's developments. The young Swedish woman and her Norwegian suitor are among those who remain, their conversation having reached a level of seriousness that suggests formal negotiations between their families may soon begin. The servants, meanwhile, begin the subtle process of adjusting the chamber's atmosphere for the more intimate interactions that typically conclude such gatherings. Lamps are dimmed to create pools of soft light separated by comfortable shadows. Fresh incense is added to the braziers to refresh the air, and additional wine is brought out, older, more precious vintages reserved for the most important occasions. The conversations that continue in this transformed environment take on a different quality, more personal and revealing than the earlier public discussions. The careful masks of diplomatic courtesy begin to slip, revealing glimpses of the genuine personalities and desires that drive these powerful individuals in their private moments. The host and hostess, their duties as public entertainers largely complete, find themselves able to focus more attention on their own relationship and their assessment of the evening's outcomes. Their quiet conversation, conducted in the privacy of their own domain, reveals both the satisfaction of successful social management and the ongoing concerns that occupy those who must constantly navigate the dangerous waters of elite politics. The young Norwegian shows promise, the lady observes, her voice carrying the tone of someone who has spent the evening making careful assessments of character and potential. His family's connections could prove valuable, and his personal qualities suggest he would treat a wife with appropriate respect and consideration. Her husband nods thoughtfully, his own observations colored by his assessment of the political and economic implications of the potential alliance. His resources are substantial, and his reputation for honor is unblemished. More importantly, he seems genuinely attracted to her intelligence rather than merely her beauty or her family's wealth. Their discussion continues, touching on the various nuances and implications they have observed during the evening's interactions. This is the true business of elite Viking society, the careful cultivation and management of relationships that will determine not only individual fates but the broader patterns of power and influence that shape their world. As the evening draws toward its conclusion and the last guests prepare to depart, the chamber takes on yet another character. The grand public space of earlier hours transforms into something more intimate and personal, a private domain where the host and hostess can finally relax and reflect on their own relationship and desires. The servants who remain attend to the final preparations for the night, their movements quiet and unobtrusive as they bank the fires, collect the precious vessels, and arrange the sleeping chamber for their master's comfort. The Irish woman who is served throughout the evening receives a quiet word of approval from her mistress, a small gesture that acknowledges her successful contribution to the evening's success and reinforces the complex bond between them. The transformation of the space from public theater to private sanctuary is accomplished with practiced efficiency, the servants understanding without explicit instruction how to create an environment suitable for their master's most intimate moments. Silk hangings are adjusted to provide privacy, sleeping furs are arranged with care, and the lighting is modulated to create an atmosphere of warmth and sensuality. In this final transformation, the chamber reveals its ultimate purpose as not merely a stage for political theater, but as a private world where the elite can explore the more personal aspects of their relationships away from the constant scrutiny and calculation that governs their public lives. Here, in the soft glow of oil lamps and the whisper of silk against skin, they can allow themselves to be something more than political actors. They can be simply human beings seeking connection, pleasure, and meaning in lives that are often dominated by duty and responsibility. The host and hostess, finally alone except for the most trusted servants who attend to their personal needs, begin the intimate rituals that conclude their public day and transition into their private night. Their interactions, while still shaped by the formal courtesies that govern all elite behavior, take on a warmth and genuineness that have been carefully controlled throughout the earlier hours. She allows him to help remove the elaborate jewelry that has marked her status throughout the evening, each piece a small ritual of transition from public figure to private woman. He, in turn, sets aside the ceremonial weapons and ornaments that have proclaimed his rank and power, becoming simply a man in the presence of the woman he has chosen to share his life and ambitions. Their conversation, freed from the constraints of public diplomacy, reveals the genuine partnership that has developed between them over years of shared responsibility and mutual support. They discuss not only the evening's political implications, but also their personal reactions to the various guests, their private assessments of character and potential, and their own hopes and concerns for the future. The luxury that surrounds them, the silk hangings, the precious metals, the exotic perfumes, provides a backdrop for intimacy rather than a barrier to it. These material expressions of wealth and power become tools for creating beauty and pleasure rather than mere displays of status. The chamber transforms from a stage for public performance into a sanctuary for private expression, where the full range of human emotion and desire can be safely explored and expressed. As they prepare for sleep in their elaborately appointed private world, surrounded by the finest products of medieval craftsmanship and international trade, they embody both the possibilities and the constraints of elite Viking society. They have achieved levels of comfort, security, and cultural sophistication that would have seemed impossible to their ancestors, yet their lives remain governed by the same fundamental needs for connection, understanding, and love that drive all human beings regardless of their social position. The servants who attend their final preparations for sleep do so with the quiet efficiency of those who understand that they are witnessing not merely the conclusion of a social event, but the private moments of individuals who, despite their wealth and power, remain fundamentally human in their needs and desires. The careful attention paid to every detail of comfort and beauty reflects not mere luxury, but a deep understanding that the quality of private life determines the ultimate satisfaction and meaning of any existence, no matter how outwardly successful. In the gentle movements of silk curtains stirred by warm air from carefully tended braziers, in the soft glow of lamplight reflecting off precious metals and polished stones, in the whispered conversations that reveal hearts and minds freed from public constraints, we see the full complexity of human relationship played out in its most refined and sophisticated form. The chamber settles into the deeper quiet of night, its luxury and beauty creating a perfect environment for the intimate connections that give meaning to all the political maneuvering and social performance that has preceded these private moments. In this rarefied atmosphere where every detail has been crafted to support and enhance human pleasure and connection, the Viking elite have created a world that honors both the practical necessities of survival and advancement and the deeper needs of the human spirit for beauty, intimacy, and love. As sleep approaches and the last lamp is dimmed to provide just enough light for safety and comfort, the chamber completes its transformation from public stage to private sanctuary. Here, in the soft embrace of the finest materials that medieval wealth could purchase and the most sophisticated understanding of human needs that Viking culture could provide, we see the ultimate expression of how a successful civilization approaches the eternal human quest for happiness, meaning, and connection. Let the gentle whisper of silk hangings and the soft warmth of banked fires carry you now toward your own rest, surrounded by the understanding that even in the most complex and stratified societies, the fundamental human needs for love, beauty, and intimate connection remain constant and ultimately triumphant over all the barriers that wealth, power, and social position might seem to create. As the silk hangings settle into stillness in that distant Jarl's chamber, and the last whispers of elite conversation fade into the contented silence of satisfied sleep, let us step back from the intimate details of individual lives and relationships to contemplate the larger patterns we have discovered in our journey through the landscape of Viking sexuality. Like travelers returning from a long voyage to a strange and fascinating land, we carry with us images and insights that illuminate not only the world we have visited, but also our own understanding of what it means to be human in any age. We began our exploration in the communal warmth of a longhouse, where families and strangers shared not only physical space, but also the complex rituals of courtship, desire, and intimate connection that unfolded within the constraints and opportunities of community life. There, in the golden glow of central fires and the gentle intoxication of honey mead, we witnessed how a culture could balance individual desire with collective need, how privacy could be created within publicity, how love could flourish even within the most practical arrangements of survival and social order. The Longhouse revealed to us a world where sexuality was neither hidden in shame nor celebrated in isolation, but woven naturally into the fabric of daily existence. The careful choreography of glances and touches, the subtle signals of availability and interest, the patient rituals of courtship conducted under the watchful but understanding eyes of the community, all of these spoke to a culture that had achieved a remarkable integration of personal desire and social responsibility. In those timber halls, we learned that the Vikings understood something our modern world often struggles to grasp, that human sexuality is inherently social, that our most intimate desires are shaped and expressed within communities of meaning, and that the health of individual relationships depends ultimately on the health of the larger social fabric that surrounds and supports them. The mead that loosened tongues also loosened the rigid boundaries between public and private life, creating spaces where authentic connection could develop within structures of mutual respect and collective wisdom. From the communal intimacy of the Longhouse, our journey carried us to the wind-swept shores of Vinland, where we encountered Freydís Eiríksdóttir, that complex and fascinating woman who embodied both the possibilities and the perils of pursuing individual ambition in a world governed by collective needs and ancient codes of honor. Her story revealed the intricate connections between love and power, between personal desire and political strategy, between the human heart's longing for connection and the equally powerful drive for achievement and recognition. In Freydís, we saw how sexuality could become both weapon and vulnerability, how the same qualities that made her irresistible to lovers also made her dangerous to rivals, how the very strength that enabled her to achieve extraordinary things ultimately isolated her from the simple human warmth that makes achievement meaningful. Her relationships, with Thorvald, with Thorvard, with the warriors who followed her into the unknown western lands, were complex negotiations between affection and advantage, between genuine feeling and strategic calculation. Yet even in her ultimate isolation, surrounded by fear rather than love, Freydís remained magnificently human in her refusal to accept limitations, her determination to write her own story on the vast canvas of medieval possibility. Her legacy reminds us that the price of transcending conventional boundaries is often loneliness, but also that some spirits are too large to be contained by the expectations of their times, no matter what the personal cost might be. From the grand drama of individual ambition, our exploration led us into the patient silence of archaeological sites, where fragments of bone and stone preserve the intimate secrets of people whose names have been forgotten, but whose desires echo across the centuries. In museums and excavation reports, in the careful analysis of pollen samples and the painstaking translation of runic inscriptions, we discovered a culture that approached sexuality with a sophistication and openness that challenges many of our assumptions about medieval life. The fertility amulets worn close to beating hearts, the ritual spaces where sacred and profane merged into unified expressions of life force, the detailed knowledge of herbal contraceptives and sexual enhancement techniques, all of these revealed a people who saw no fundamental contradiction between spiritual seeking and physical pleasure, between religious devotion and sexual satisfaction. Their goddess Freya presided over both love and war, both fertility and death, embodying their understanding that these forces were not opposites but partners in the eternal dance of existence. The archaeological evidence showed us that the Vikings had developed approaches to sexual health and relationship counseling that in many ways surpassed those of their supposedly more civilized contemporaries. Their practitioners of sexual healing combined sophisticated herbal knowledge with psychological insight and ritual technique, creating holistic approaches to human sexuality that recognized its importance for overall health and well-being. Perhaps most significantly, the material remains revealed a culture comfortable with sexual diversity and variation, one that celebrated the full spectrum of human desire within frameworks of mutual respect and community acceptance. The quality and artistry of their erotic objects, the integration of sexual symbolism into everyday life, the evidence of professional sexual healing, all spoke to a mature understanding of sexuality as a fundamental aspect of human experience deserving of serious attention and careful cultivation. Finally, our journey ascended to the rarefied atmosphere of Viking elite society, where silk hangings and exotic perfumes created backdrops for the complex negotiations between love and politics, between personal attraction and strategic alliance. In those luxurious chambers, we witnessed how sexuality becomes intertwined with power, how desire serves multiple purposes in the careful choreography of aristocratic life, how even the most privileged individuals must navigate the tensions between authentic feeling and practical necessity. The elite households revealed the full complexity of Viking social organization, where relationships operated simultaneously on personal, political, and economic levels. The young Swedish woman negotiating with her Norwegian suitor, the mature couples sharing wisdom about marriage and partnership, the intricate dynamics between masters and servants, all illustrated how sexuality in Viking society was never simply a matter of individual choice, but was always embedded in larger networks of obligation, opportunity, and meaning. Yet even in these most sophisticated settings, we saw evidence of genuine human feeling breaking through the constraints of political calculation. The tenderness between the host and hostess as they prepared for private intimacy, the careful attention paid to creating environments that supported both pleasure and connection, the understanding that material luxury was valuable primarily as it served the deeper needs of the human spirit, all suggested that even the most complex social arrangements ultimately served the fundamental human quest for love, understanding, and authentic relationship. As we reflect on these four aspects of Viking sexuality, communal, individual, sacred, and elite, certain patterns emerge that speak to universal aspects of human experience while also revealing the particular genius of Norse culture. The Vikings had achieved something remarkable, an integration of sexuality into the larger patterns of life that honored both its power and its complexity, that celebrated its pleasures while acknowledging its responsibilities, that saw it as both deeply personal and inevitably social. Their approach to sexuality was holistic in ways that our modern world, with its tendency to compartmentalize and categorize, often struggles to achieve. They understood that sexual health depends on community health, that individual satisfaction requires social support, that the deepest intimacy flourishes within frameworks of mutual respect and shared meaning. They had created cultural forms, the Longhouse with its careful balance of privacy and community, the religious practices that celebrated sexuality as sacred, the social structures that channeled desire toward constructive ends, that supported rather than suppressed the full expression of human sexual nature. Perhaps most importantly, they had avoided the false dichotomies that have plagued much of human history, the artificial separation of body and spirit, the opposition between individual desire and collective good, the division between love and duty. In their world, these apparent opposites were understood as complementary aspects of a unified life, different expressions of the same fundamental life force that drove both personal satisfaction and social cohesion. Their integration of sexuality into daily life, their comfort with erotic symbolism and explicit discussion, their development of sophisticated approaches to sexual health and relationship counseling, all of these emerged from their fundamental understanding that human sexuality is not a problem to be solved or controlled, but a gift to be celebrated and wisely cultivated. They saw sexual energy as one of the great creative forces of existence, deserving of the same respect and careful attention they brought to other fundamental aspects of life like agriculture, craftsmanship, and warfare. This wisdom speaks across the centuries to our own time, when many people struggle to achieve the kind of integration between sexuality and spirituality, between personal desire and social responsibility, between individual fulfillment and collective well-being that the Vikings seem to take for granted. Their example suggests that it is possible to create cultural forms that support rather than suppress human sexual nature, that it is possible to achieve satisfaction and meaning in intimate relationships without sacrificing the larger connections that give life purpose and direction. The Vikings understood that we are not isolated individuals pursuing private pleasures, but social beings whose deepest satisfactions emerge from our connections with others, whose most intimate relationships are nourished by the larger communities that surround and support them. They had learned to create spaces, physical, social, and spiritual, where authentic intimacy could develop within structures that honored both individual agency and collective wisdom. Their legacy in the realm of sexuality is thus not merely historical but practical, offering insights and possibilities that remain relevant for anyone seeking to understand the complex relationships between love and power, between desire and duty, between personal satisfaction and social contribution. They show us that it is possible to approach sexuality with both passion and wisdom, with both pleasure and responsibility, with both individual authenticity and social awareness. As we prepare to leave behind this journey through the intimate landscapes of Viking life, let us carry with us not only the specific images and stories we have encountered, but also the larger vision they represent. A vision of human sexuality as sacred and natural, as deeply personal and inevitably social, as a source of both pleasure and meaning in lives that honor both individual desires and collective needs. The Longhouse, with its careful balance of community and privacy, still stands as a model for how we might create spaces that support authentic intimacy within frameworks of mutual support. The archaeological evidence of sophisticated sexual healing and fertility practices reminds us that human sexuality deserves serious attention and careful cultivation rather than neglect or suppression. The elite chambers, with their integration of luxury and intimacy, suggest that material prosperity finds its ultimate meaning in its service to human relationship and connection. And Freydís herself, complex and contradictory, magnificent and tragic, reminds us that the human spirit is capable of extraordinary things when it refuses to accept conventional limitations, even when the price of such refusal is loneliness and isolation. Her story cautions us about the costs of unchecked ambition, while celebrating the possibilities that emerge when individuals dare to imagine different ways of being in the world. Together, these elements of Viking sexuality create a portrait of a culture that had achieved something remarkable, a way of approaching human desire that was both realistic and idealistic, both practical and poetic, both grounded in biological necessity and lifted by spiritual aspiration. They had learned to see sexuality as one of the great creative forces of existence, worthy of celebration and careful cultivation, deserving of integration into the larger patterns of meaningful life. In our own time, when so many people struggle with questions of intimacy and connection, when relationships often seem fragmented and unsatisfying, when sexuality is too often reduced to mere physical function or commercial transaction, the Viking example offers hope and guidance. They show us that it is possible to achieve integration and satisfaction, that human sexuality can be both deeply fulfilling and socially constructive, that intimate relationships can serve both personal happiness and collective well-being. The gentle rhythms of their approach to sexuality, unhurried, patient, attentive to both physical and emotional needs, embedded in larger contexts of meaning and purpose, offer a counterpoint to the haste and superficiality that often characterize modern relationships. Their understanding that sexual satisfaction depends ultimately on the quality of the relationships that contain it, that intimacy flourishes within communities of trust and mutual support, provides wisdom that transcends the specific circumstances of their time and place. As the images of our journey begin to fade like morning mist over a Nordic fjord, as the voices of ancient lovers merge with the eternal whisper of wind through timber halls, let yourself be carried toward rest by the understanding that human sexuality, approached with wisdom and reverence, can be a pathway to some of the deepest and most satisfying experiences available to mortal beings. The Vikings knew this truth, lived it daily, celebrated it in their art and ritual, protected and nurtured it through their social arrangements and cultural practices. They created a world where love and desire could flourish within frameworks of honor and responsibility, where individual satisfaction served collective well-being, where the most intimate pleasures were connected to the largest meanings. Let their example soothe away the tensions and contradictions of modern life, the artificial divisions between body and spirit, the false oppositions between personal fulfillment and social obligation. In the patient wisdom of archaeological time, where objects wait for millennia to tell their stories of human love and longing, Find the peace that comes from understanding that sexuality, properly understood and carefully cultivated, is one of the great gifts of existence, a source of pleasure and meaning, of connection and creativity, of individual satisfaction and social cohesion. Sleep now in the embrace of this ancient understanding, surrounded by the gentle spirits of people who lived and loved with a fullness and integration that still has much to teach us about what it means to be fully human. In the soft glow of banked fires and the whisper of silk against skin, in the rhythm of shared breathing and the warmth of trusted companionship, in the eternal dance of desire and fulfillment that has connected lovers across all the centuries of human existence, find the rest that comes from knowing that you too are part of this great pattern. This endless story of connection and care that makes life beautiful and meaningful despite all its challenges and uncertainties. The Longhouse stands eternal in the realm of memory and possibility, its doors always open to those seeking warmth and understanding, its fires always burning for those who need light and comfort, its community always ready to welcome those who approach with respect and genuine desire for connection. Rest now in its embrace, and let the ancient wisdom of human love carry you gently into dreams where all desires find their proper fulfillment and all hearts discover their truest homes.